100 children were locked away on Mount Hangshan. No one outside knew what had happened inside that place. And when that gate of hell finally opened, only one child stepped out. It was Dan Hyung-woo. But what returned was no longer an ordinary human. He had no emotions and didn't know how to live like a normal person. In exchange, his body contained a power that made the world tremble. A power great enough for people to call him the demon god. And most terrifying of all, Dan Hyung-woo didn't want to be a hero or a savior at all. He had only one goal: to find the person who turned his life into hell and make them pay dearly. Join murimrecap to see what happens next. A treasure map suddenly appeared, sending the martial world into an uproar. It pointed to Hangshan, where the manual of the Supreme Master Shan Jizha was hidden. Along with the map came a secret weapon. A crow cried pitifully, as if heralding a storm about to sweep through Murim. Hangshan Mountain, long peaceful, suddenly trembled violently. In broad daylight, the towering peak unexpectedly split open down the middle. A thunderous explosion hurled rocks into the air, dust blanketing the area. From the rubble, an entrance to a dark cave appeared. From within the smoke, a ragged young man stepped out. Dan Hyung-woo muttered that he had finally escaped that damned cave. He looked up. It turned out the sky was truly this blue, an image he hadn't seen in a very long time. Hyung-woo opened his hand to feel the sunlight. He tried to recall life before being locked in the cave, but his mind was completely blank, with no memories remaining. His gaze darkened with emotion. Whatever the cost, he had to remember everything to carry out his plan of revenge. The memories began 10 years earlier. Xianjidia appeared before a group of children with a mysteriously solemn declaration. In 10 years, you will have to save the world. At that time, Hyung-woo was one of 100 orphan children gathered by the old man. The old man's cold stare seemed to bore into their minds, making anyone tremble. Xianjija ordered absolute obedience from the group. He told them to rest today, because tomorrow the hellish training would officially begin. He smiled wickedly and said he had sealed the exit with a massive rock wall. Anyone who thought of escaping could forget it. The first lessons began with breathing techniques called the 3 Chi arts. Then came sword training and footwork to move the body, a continuous series of brutal challenges. For 3 grueling years, everything from eating and sleeping to walking was tightly controlled by him. The children were little more than puppets in his hands, stripped of any personal freedom. 3 years later, he gathered them before a mysterious stone door. He said this was the true beginning. They had 7 more years to complete the Ma-Thing martial arts. The heavy stone door opened, and the group filed in to train without restraint or rules. Hyung-woo realized the bitter truth through a gaze full of hatred. All the suffering they endured in that damned place had been orchestrated entirely by Thiam Suk Fi Guji. A strange sound made the group startle and turn around. Terrifying monsters with glowing red eyes suddenly emerged from the surrounding darkness. The beasts roared and charged. The trainees drew their swords in unison, preparing for a merciless fight to the death. In that moment, Hyung-woo lunged into the midst of the monsters with murderous intent. Each passing day was a horrifying nightmare. It was no longer training, but a brutal battle to snatch life back from the jaws of death. But because of that, their martial arts advanced dramatically, far stronger than when they were in the misty cave. 10 years passed, blood-stained the cold stone red. Of the 100 children from that day, none survived except him. His closest friend also fell right before his eyes. Back in the present, he stood amid a verdant forest brimming with life. He decided to take the name of his deceased friend, Dan Hyung-woo, to start a new life. Hyung-woo entered the bustling town and paused in front of a tavern where the scent of food was enticing. He stepped into the tavern. The noisy chatter of the patrons felt strange and somewhat suffocating after 10 years of solitude. At a nearby table, Jo Seolion happened to notice him. Her gaze was drawn to the rugged, mysterious stranger who had just entered. Seolion whispered to Jo-in, telling him to look at that man. A man carrying a jet-black sword with no scabbard looked odd. Jo-in squinted at his sister's pointing finger. He had to admit the sword did not look ordinary. It seemed to harbor an invisible power. A waiter brought out a steaming bowl of noodles. Hyung-woo picked up his chopsticks, wondering how long it had been since he last ate a proper meal. A warm feeling spread through his body, as if all the fatigue and darkness of the past 10 years were dissolving. Jo Seolion kept her eyes on him. She wondered why this shabby-looking man occupied her thoughts and attention so much. After finishing his meal, Hyung-woo set the bowl down and murmured that it was delicious. At that moment, the waiter cheerfully came over to ask about the meal. "Your meal comes to 5 wen, sir." The waiter's words froze Hyung-woo. He suddenly realized he had completely forgotten the concept of money after being imprisoned for so long. Hyung-woo echoed the word money with a bewildered look like a child. Living in the dark cave for 10 years, he had never needed such material luxuries. He bluntly said he had no money. The waiter immediately changed his tone, snapping that if he had no money, he should hand over the sword at his waist as collateral for the meal. Hyung-woo looked down at the sword and coldly refused. It was the only memento bought with the life of his last friend. He would never give it up. The waiter shouted in anger, accusing him of planning to eat and run from the start. Everyone in the tavern turned to look at him with scorn and fury. Join was startled when he saw Zhou Xulian suddenly stand. He anxiously called her name, seeing his sister move to intervene in the trouble. Zhou Xulian stepped forward, offering a pouch of coins and telling the waiter not to make things difficult for the young man. She would pay for his meal herself. Hyungwoo quietly watched the young woman who had reached out to help him. In a moment of confusion, he wondered if she was truly paying for him. Up close, Zhou Xulian noticed something strange in Hyungwoo. His eyes were as pure as a child's discovering the world for the first time. He turned his back and walked away without saying a word. Solian watched him go. She felt as if he had wanted to say something, but ultimately didn't. Hyungwoo quietly left the tavern. Everyone around was stunned, unable to believe he could leave without even offering a simple thank you. Join stepped closer to his sister, muttering in irritation. He assumed the ragged man was ungrateful and even lacked any internal martial energy, but Celion seemed unconcerned by those insults. Her mind was now focused solely on the beautiful sword the young man carried. She realized that a treasured sword without a scabbard would only bring trouble to its owner. Unable to leave him like that, Solion decided to follow him immediately. Standing alone outside, Hyungwoo brooded, blaming himself. He realized he should have thanked the kind young woman after receiving her help. The Cloud Pavilion Tavern is unusually bustling today. This is the gathering place for countless masters before entering Holhan's Shman. Zhou Solian looked down at the Great Hall, packed with members of the Min Martial Association. Their influence truly could not be underestimated. Even Zhou In hadn't expected the Murim leader to personally show up on this expedition. Sima Shiol explained that everyone flocked to him because of the enormous reputation of a legend. That person was Qian Jija, considered the strongest warrior in the history of the martial world. In his later years, he created the Shadow Nemesis sword and shook the whole world. His ability to perceive and read the heavens far exceeded that of ordinary people. In just 3 years, Cheong Gija turned an anonymous drifter into a top-tier master thanks to that sword style. After that master's death, Xian Jisha's martial manual vanished without a trace. Now, with Sulion's father having found the treasure map, the martial world is going crazy over it. Sima Chiol warned Seolion to be absolutely careful, though he would stay close to protect her. Sometimes unexpected things can still happen. Solion asked her father to let her follow that young man. Join strongly opposed his sister's plan to follow that wandering youth. He thought her kindness would be wasted on a rude person. Solion fell silent and accepted. Splitting from the group now would indeed be too dangerous, especially with the Murim leader about to arrive. Meanwhile, Hyungwoo strolled down the street, observing the bustling life of the townspeople. Laughter and haggling rang out everywhere. Watching the children play, Hyungwoo felt a strange peace he'd never known. He wondered how the world could be so tranquil. But that peace was immediately torn apart by memories of 10 years ago at Hellgate. The bloody scene returned, he and Segi fighting amid hordes of monsters. Seki pressed close to Hyungwoo's back, swearing that they must both escape that hell. He wanted to do all the things they'd never had the chance to do. He also asked Hyungwoo that if he made it out first, to stop by his house and tell his father a word. But Hyungwoo brushed it off, telling him to do it himself. Segi smiled, eyes full of hope. He reminded his closest friend not to die there. They plunged back into the life-or-death fight. Sword Chi raged through the dark cave teeming with hideous monsters. Suddenly, a giant monster charged forward. Seji shouted a loud warning to Hyungwoo when he saw his friend in the monster's sights. Blood sprayed. Segi took the blow himself to protect Hyungwoo just before they touched freedom. Hyungwoo screamed in agony, begging Segi to wake up. They had promised to go meet his father together. The scene around the slain monster was left only with despair. Lying in a pool of blood, Segi rasped that Hyungwoo was the strongest of them all. He asked his friend to live on and to apologize to his father. The full moon hung in the sky, but Hyungwoo's heart was empty. His freedom had been bought with the lives of 99 friends. Hyungwoo looked up at the moon. His debt to them was too great. Standing under the moonlit night, he vowed to make Shandija pay for all he had done. This grudge must be settled in blood. Back in the present, Hyungwoo realized he was standing in front of the tavern where Sulian stayed. He had unconsciously walked back here without noticing. He suddenly remembered he hadn't had a chance to thank her. Hyungwoo hid behind the door, watching Solion. She was still there, gentle and pure as when they first met. He froze when he heard their plan to move toward Hoasan. Hyungwoo's expression darkened. He decided to follow the group, keeping a distance just enough to remain unseen. The Marine Martial Association's cavalry began to set out in force. A movement order was quickly issued demanding everyone hold formation to arrive within a day. Watching Sulion's figure fade into the night, Hyungwoo wondered what they were truly searching for in the place he'd just escaped. He quietly tailed them from behind. The procession entered the Hangshan mountain pass late into the night. Hyungwoo stood atop a rooftop, observing the entire march below. The group halted to rest at the forest's edge. Hyungwoo sensed something ominous approaching. Units of the Murim Martial Association quickly took their positions. He noticed another group was silently closing in on Solion's party. Their objectives seemed completely opposed to the Murim alliances. Gaegal Jongchan advised leader Dako Woon not to worry too much. Despite bad instincts, their forces were very strong. Dako Woon pondered. He felt his instincts had grown dull with time. Pang Cholyang, walking behind, noticed Sulyeon looked tired and suggested she rest a while. He promised to protect her and asked the leader for extra time for her. Jo-in brushed him off, saying he'd take care of his sister himself. Sulyeon exhaled wearily amid the men's dispute. Suddenly, from the darkness, a sinister smile appeared. A band of strangers had surrounded them before anyone noticed. The leader sneered upon finding his target. Found you, Murim Association scum. He was Bloodfeast Demon, leader of the Greenwoods Bandits. He stood arrogantly among his underlings, mocking the righteous faction's ability to hide. Doko Woon immediately ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Jungchan instantly realized that the demonic path was involved with these outlaws. The situation had become far more serious than expected. Fear flickered in Doko Woon's eyes. He was a great villain with extremely deep and cruel martial skill, someone anyone would dread facing. He roared to his men to attack. Make the righteous taste blood. The slaughter erupted in an instant. Bloodfeast Demon charged like a beast. With a single kick, he sent Murim Alliance disciples flying. His overwhelming power caused the defensive formation to begin collapsing. Screams echoed through the forest as blood began to spill. The bandits frenziedly hacked and slaughtered, giving the Murim Alliance no chance to resist. The scene was horrific as one by one people fell beneath the enemy blades. Bloodfeast Demon stood in the midst of the battlefield, mocking the puny lot swept away in an instant. His eyes were now fixed on a single target. He charged straight at the leader, screaming Dako Woon's name with an excited grin. The ambush was brutal. The Murim Alliance was completely outnumbered, each disciple falling beneath the blades of the Greenwoods Bandits. Dako Woon gritted his teeth in anger as he tried to hold the chaotic situation at bay. The bandits grew bloodthirstier by the moment. A bald-headed thug swung his sword in a wild frenzy. Dako Woon realized they were falling into a deadly trap. Bloodfeast Demon laughed triumphantly, confident that Cheonjiha's secret weapon would undoubtedly fall into the hands of the demonic path. Dako Woon, exhausted from resisting, bitterly admitted he was at a disadvantage. At the mention of Cheonjiha's name, killing intent flared fiercely in Dan Hyungwoo's eyes. He could no longer stand by. The enemy he hated to the bone was right here. A terrifying explosion erupted in the middle of the battlefield. Everyone was stunned by the tremendous force that had just struck. Hyungwoo dove down from above. A powerful landing generated a staggering shockwave. Both Dako Woon and Bloodfeast Demon were dumbfounded. In an instant, Hyungwoo swept through the bandits with lightning-fast sword strikes. Those who had been triumphant moments ago were now soulless corpses flung about. This power did not belong to the human realm. Standing amid the wreckage, Hyungwoo exuded a chilling aura that made everyone shudder. Dako Woon was shocked to realize he had felt no presence of this young man beforehand. Jo Seolion and the others could only stand rooted, watching. Hyungwoo coldly demanded Cheonjiha's whereabouts. He stood before the leader, the black sword in his hand still stained with blood. Where is Cheonjiha? Dako Woon was grateful to be saved, but he wondered why such a powerful man sought that old man. However, his answer left Hyungwoo stunned. Cheonjiha died 10 years ago. The target of his 10-year vendetta was now nothing but emptiness. Dan Hyungwoo froze when he heard that Cheonjiha died 10 years ago. He couldn't believe the enemy he'd hunted for so long had gone so easily while his friend's blood debts remained unpaid. Hyungwoo went numb, his gaze hollow from losing his purpose. A stream of chi slipped from his body, unintentionally spreading and enveloping the forest. The pressure of the void chi caused the nearby martial artist to collapse, as if swallowed by despair. In his mind, images of his old friends returned, screaming for him to live on and avenge them. Dako Woon was drenched in sweat from the suffocating pressure. He moved to intervene to prevent a tragedy. As the killing intent filled the air, Lady Jo Seolion anxiously stepped forward to inquire. Her kindness snapped him back. Hyungwoo remembered the moment Aksegi handed him a sword and told him to live. That was the only kindness that kept him alive. He withdrew his breath. All the pressure vanished in an instant, and the martial artist sighed in relief. Dako Woon was still shaking, wondering what kind of monster the young man before him really was. Hyungwoo stared at the girl who had pulled him out of his reverie. Jo Seolion persuaded her uncle to let him come along since he had just saved the caravan. Jaegal Jongjin contemplated, realizing it would be better to keep such a dangerous man close than to face him as an enemy. After some deliberation, the two elders concluded his strength could greatly benefit the escort bureau. Dako Woon nodded in agreement with his granddaughter's suggestion. Jungchan directly offered Hyungwoo a position with the Hanan Escort Agency, a life-changing opportunity everyone coveted. He looked at the old man indifferently as if the name Escort Agency held no weight for him. His answer stunned everyone. He didn't even know what an escort agency was. Jo Seolion had to explain it was the organization that transports and protects clients, and only then did he understand. From a distance, Cho Leong and his gang began to whisper, mocking him as a country bumpkin. But Cho Leong's greedy eyes were fixed on the black sword. He realized the weapon was no ordinary blade. The caravan reached the foot of Hengshin as dusk fell. The leader sensed something strange about the place, while Hyungwoo silently observed his old home. Dako Woon was delighted at the prospect of touching Sima Cheol's legendary manual. But Jungchan reported the cave entrance had completely collapsed. They could search the whole mountain and find nothing. Hyungwoo calmly gazed at the cliff. He could still feel Jungchan's breath around here. Suddenly he shot up the sheer rock face to the astonishment of the group. He landed lightly in front of a secret entrance that had been carefully concealed. Seeing everyone's surprise, he casually said, "This is where I used to live." Jo Seolion couldn't believe her ears. While Cho Young's men scorned him as someone who lived like a beast, Dako Woon immediately ordered Cho Young's crew into the cave, leaving others outside to keep watch. He thanked Hyungwoo for his help, but Hyungwoo showed no interest. He bluntly said there was nothing inside except memories of death. Bloody images of the past in the cave resurfaced, dark and full of resentment. Seeing them insist on entering, he turned his back without a word. Because Simichol was dead, everything inside meant nothing anymore. Jo Seolion curiously asked if he really had once lived in such a terrifying place. At that moment, Cho Leong and his men returned with sullen faces. He stopped the young lady and slandered him as a spy sent by the forest bandits. A crafty gleam showed in his eyes. His true target was the treasured sword on the man's person. Up close, the sword emanated a dense killing intent that someone like him had long craved. He forced him to hand over the sword to be confiscated, but Hyungwoo coldly gripped the hilt, declaring he would not let anyone touch his friend's keepsake. He released an oppressive aura of killing intent, his icy gaze making clear he would never surrender the sword to anyone until his last breath. Cho Leong smiled triumphantly, convinced he had cornered his prey. But Hyungwoo's eyes remained oddly calm, as he calculated every smallest movement of his opponents. The two men rushed in simultaneously to attack from both sides, but with a slight bow of his body, Hyungwoo had both blades sweep just above his head. His hand rested on the hilt of the black sword, and murderous intent began seeping out like a demon clawing to break free. They froze for a beat, as if feeling the chill radiating from this young man. One of them still shouted stubbornly, demanding Hyungwoo surrender the sword or there would be blood. Hyungwoo's eyes narrowed slightly. His thumb began to press the scabbard, and in a heartbeat a head could be severed. "Stop," a loud command cut through the fight. It was Dako Woon, the martial world leader. He stepped forward with an authoritative expression, displeased at his men causing disorder. Dako Woon ordered all forces to withdraw immediately. He sensed something amiss about the young man before him. As Cho Young left, Jo Seolion hurried to Hyungwoo's side, anxiously asking if he was hurt. Hyungwoo looked puzzled. He genuinely didn't understand what okay or not okay meant in this world. Seeing him silent, she introduced herself as Jo Seolion, a daughter of the Jo family. Dan Hyungwoo, at last he spoke. The name sounded as cold as he was. Meanwhile in Hubei province, rumors that Marine Alliance had seized Cheongicha's secret weapon spread like wildfire. At Marine Alliance headquarters, the massive complex was now engulfed in an extremely heavy atmosphere. An emergency meeting of the elders was underway. Everyone wore grave expressions. On the table lay an old letter in a mysterious wooden box, the only items found in the cave. An elder read the letter aloud, recalling a terrifying entity named the Blood Demon that would arise to destroy the world. The image of Cheongjija resurfaced. That old man had written a final warning before disappearing into oblivion. The letter also mentioned 100 masters trained in secret, and inside the box lay the yin-yang parasite used to control them. The box was open to reveal a grotesque, pitch-black creature that made everyone's hair stand on end. The elders began to murmur. They couldn't find any trace of the 100 masters and thus doubted the letter's authenticity. Some suggested it was merely a trap to draw the martial world's attention to the Marine Alliance. Rumors in the market continued to spread, making the situation increasingly chaotic and uncontrollable. Leader Dako Woon frowned. He vaguely realized an invisible hand was pulling the strings behind these events. And the first person brought into the spotlight was Jo Il-hyun, who had provided the map to the cave. Dako Woon suspected the Jo family might be hiding something, or worse, being used by a traitor. At the same time, at the Jo clan estate, the group led by Hainan's branch chief had also returned safely. Hyungwoo gazed at the Jo family's sprawling mansion. Compared to the dark cave he once lived in, this place was worlds apart. Sima Cheol decided to take him to the Honan to arrange temporary work. On the way, So Leon kept feeling guilty for not having prepared a proper sword scabbard for Hyungwoo. She didn't know that the black sword carried such intense murderous intent that no ordinary scabbard could withstand it for more than a few seconds. Hyungwoo coldly refused, saying he didn't need that ornamental fuss. But Seolion's 3 words, "I'm sorry," suddenly brought back memories of Ak Segi. The image of his friend collapsing in a pool of blood from years ago flashed vividly before him. He always wondered why the one dying was him, yet the one who had to apologize wasn't. Hyungwoo turned to Sulion with a cold gaze and demanded she never say that word to him again. Sulion flinched and trembled. She couldn't understand why a simple phrase provoked such a fierce reaction. The young lady stood there stunned, bewildered and unsure what she had done wrong. Night fell at the Hainan escort agency as cargo was loaded onto wagons for the new journey. Sima Cho led Young Woo to meet the porter Zhang Chil, officially throwing him into the bureau's harshest training mill. Zhang Chil was straining to lift a load, glancing at the new recruit with an unfriendly look. Sima Chiol told Hyung Woo to learn carefully, while the porter sneered and promised to take care of him. The old man knew Zhang Chil's nature well and silently prayed nothing would go too far. No sooner had the old man turned away than Zhang Chil revealed his sly face, thinking that even if the newcomer knew the boss, here he must follow Zhang Chil's rules. He stepped forward to assert dominance, flipping his chin and asking the newcomer's name in a condescending, challenging tone. The only response to that aggression was the curt name, Dan Hyungwoo. Seeing that ungrateful attitude, Zhang Chil instantly blew his top, and he began launching personal attacks and mocking Hyungwoo's physique. Fury overtook him. The big man roared threats to make him taste hell on his very first day. Hyungwoo stood there, keenly sensing the thick, murderous intent aimed straight at him. Only a cold question remained in his mind. Should I cut this guy down? Zhang Chil's eyes burned at the sight of Hyungwoo's sword. This porter couldn't stand seeing a rookie swaggering around with a weapon like that. But in response to that arrogance came Hyungwoo's cold, icy gaze. He refused outright, emitting a murderous aura that choked Zhang Chil, who could clearly feel imminent deadly danger. Unable to bear the pressure, Zhang Chil made an excuse about the night and slunk away. He turned his back, sweat already streaming down his face. The nearby porters laughed with satisfaction, teasing that loudmouth Zhang Chil was now pale with fear of a green recruit. Enraged, he shouted for everyone to go to sleep immediately. As the others dispersed, Hyungwoo kept a calm expression as if nothing had happened. He calmly surveyed his surroundings, ignoring the curious stares. Zhang Chil's gaze seethed with hatred. He was certain that without that sword, Hyungwoo was nothing compared to him. Zhang Chil silently vowed to make him pay for the humiliation. Night fell. The porter's dormitory sank into darkness and steady snores. Everyone slept after a long, tiring day. Zhang Chil crept up, glancing around for Hyungwoo's sleeping spot. He was plotting something sinister to take revenge for his earlier defeat. He jumped when he saw a dark silhouette standing in the middle of the room like a pillar. In the dim light, he rubbed his eyes and looked again, unable to believe what he saw. Zhang Chil fell backward onto the floor, his mouth unable to form a sound. He recognized the upright figure as Hyungwoo, though his eyes were still tightly shut. A bizarre sight. Hyungwoo was standing asleep. Zhang Chil reached to touch the sword, but the prey instinct in him screamed in alarm. Suddenly, Hyungwoo's ice-blue eyes opened. It wasn't an ordinary look, but the gaze of a predator seeing through the heart of the one who intended to kill him. A dense pressure spread, enveloping the space. Zhang Chil felt as if thousands of blades were at his throat. He froze, unable to move even a finger. An overwhelming terror struck. To Zhang Chil, Hyungwoo was no longer human but a deathly entity risen from hell. He felt like a small herbivore facing a hunter's barrel. All attempts to fight or flee became meaningless. Zhang Chil couldn't believe an ordinary person could possess such chilling killing intent. Zhang Chil collapsed to the floor, mumbling pleas for his life. He uttered weak, hopeless cries out of sheer terror. In fact, Hyungwoo had no intention of attacking. He was merely circulating his inner energy to protect his body while sleeping, a reflex engraved deep in his blood. This habit of sleeping standing up formed from 10 years surviving at the gate of hell. There, lying down meant giving your life to the monsters, so he had to remain ready to fight. Even while resting or eating, Hyungwoo never let his guard down. The killing intent around him was like an invisible armor no one could breach. The next morning, Hyungwoo woke up refreshed. He exhaled, seeing Zhang Chil still sprawled on the floor with a dazed expression. As soon as Hyungwoo turned, Zhang Chil screamed and fled for his life. The other porters stood dumbfounded, not understanding what had happened to the arrogant old hand. Everyone began a new workday. Shouts of urging rang through the escort office. Heaps of heavy crates waited to be unloaded. Hyungwoo began to display his superior strength. To him, these huge crates were as light as empty boxes. He leapt into the air, carrying enormous crates with ease. His graceful, nimble movements left everyone stunned. Hyungwoo expended no effort at all, his face as calm as if he were taking a stroll. He told himself his porter work wasn't too difficult. For Hyungwoo, this kind of manual labor brought an unusual sense of peace. The other porters below gaped up at him. They couldn't believe their eyes, a rookie doing the work of 10 men. Whispers began to spread throughout the loading area. They feared that at this rate, Hyungwoo would steal everyone's jobs. Just then, Jo Sulian appeared. The Miss Jo looked at Hyungwoo with a thoughtful gaze. Remembering his cold warning the night before about never apologizing, Soyeon still couldn't fully grasp the meaning behind that remark. She felt Hyungwoo was a great mystery she subconsciously wanted to explore. She dared to call his name. When Hyungwoo turned to look, Soyeon suddenly felt embarrassed, realizing she'd said his name so naturally without thinking. Hyungwoo conversed calmly, saying he was very satisfied with his current work. Sulian hesitantly asked about his likes and dislikes, trying to ease the awkwardness between them. He answered that he loved peace and hated most when it was disturbed. In particular, he repeated that he hated most hearing apologies from someone he considered a friend. The words friend moved Xiaoliang deeply. She smiled brightly, vowing to cherish the friendship and never let an apology come between them. But that peaceful atmosphere did not last long. A loud procession of riders entered, led by Peian Zhuliang, a young, arrogant fighter from the Martial Forest Alliance. Xiaoliang was surprised to see Zhuliang appear. Zhuliang announced that the Martial Forest Alliance had decided to fully support the Henan Escort Bureau. The news felt like an omen of upcoming turmoil. While Hyung-woo still longed for a peaceful life, the martial world outside was preparing to spiral into bloodshed. At the scene of a massacre, fighters stood in shock at the horrific sight. 30 elite members of the Heavenly Watch Corps had been wiped out with no clear cause. Blood flowed like a river, bodies strewn everywhere. The most terrifying thing was that they had all been felled by a single person in the blink of an eye. In the darkness, a blazing red eye watched everything with a cruel smile. An incredibly terrifying enemy was emerging, ready to shatter the peace Hyung-woo longed for. The villain's grin widened. He muttered that the celestial mechanism had spawned hundreds of monsters, but would they be able to stand against a blood demon like him? In the darkness, the mysterious leader was furious that the entire Heavenly Guard Brigade had been wiped out at Hosun Forn. He couldn't believe anyone dared lay a hand on his people. He ordered his subordinates to investigate everyone present there along with the Martial Alliance. Back at the Henan Escort Agency, Miss Jo Seolian was waiting when a parade of riders swaggered up. Leading them was Pang Kolyong, deputy of the Azure Dragon Corps. As soon as he saw Seolian, he began flattering her, but his gaze quickly turned sour when he noticed a strange man standing beside her. He wondered why a porter was allowed to stand so close to the young lady. Dan Hyungwoo kept a blank expression, not bothering to react. Cheolyang sneered at Hyungwoo for being a porter who carried a sword, implying he wasn't worthy to hold it. Seolian quickly spoke up to defend him, telling him not to pay attention to that man. Hearing Seolian call Hyungwoo by name only made Cheolyang angrier. His sister Miryang standing beside him could only look at her brother with exasperation. Hyungwoo calmly confirmed his name when asked. His composure made the whole Azure Dragon Corps freeze. At the tense moment, martial instructor Hyung Pyo appeared. He said he had orders from the director to train Hyungwoo before the upcoming escort mission. Sulian worried because Hyungwoo had just started working and already had to go on a mission. Meanwhile, Cheolyang was pleased at the thought of getting the thorn in his side sent away. Hyung Pyo told Hyungwoo to hand over his sword, but he refused outright. Seeing this, Hyung Pyo had no choice but to tell him to follow, thinking to himself that this fella was formidable. Cheolyang's men mocked him, threatening that Hyungwoo would be fired soon. Miryang sighed, finding these men childish. Miryang watched Hyungwoo's retreating figure and saw he was unfazed by the provocation. She wondered whether the sword was mere show or if he truly had skill. Suryeon looked after him anxiously, called out, but Hyungwoo replied tersely that he would go because he didn't want to lose his job. Hyungwoo quietly walked off with Hyung Pyo under everyone's gaze. In his office, Director Sima Chol told Hyung Pyo to take good care of Hyungwoo. He wanted to discourage him so he'd leave before getting closer to his daughter. Hyung Pyo was somewhat puzzled why he had to tutor a burly porter like that. Sima Chil only smiled and said he'd understand once he met him. Hyung Pyo led Hyungwoo to the training yard, silently judging his odd way of speaking. But what concerned him most was why a porter clung so stubbornly to his sword. He asked Hyungwoo if he was practicing any sword technique. Hyungwoo just stared back without saying a word. Assuming Hyungwoo was an amateur dreaming of being a martial artist, Hyung Pyo began to explain the three-chi sword technique, the foundation of martial arts, and confidently claimed it was far more practical in combat than most other things. Hyung Pyo drew his sword and told Hyungwoo to use his own technique to spar. He wanted to see how skilled this porter really was. Hyungwoo countered with a question that froze Hyung Pyo. Do you intend to kill me? Hyung Pyo hurriedly waved his hand, explaining this was only a training match to assess skill. Hyungwoo replied nonchalantly that his level was far above Hyung Pyo's. The remark left the instructor stunned. Hyung Pyo burst into a hearty laugh, thinking the new recruit was arrogant. He declared he would show him what true power looked like. Hyungwoo reached out his hand, face deadly serious, muttering calculations under his breath. Hyung Pyo looked bewildered, not understanding what he was doing. Hyungwoo explained that it was his first time fighting without killing, so he had to gauge his force carefully. After adjusting his stance for a moment, Hyungwoo announced he was ready and guaranteed he wouldn't accidentally kill Hyung Pyo. His gaze turned icy as he stared straight at his opponent. Hyung Pyo clicked his tongue and lunged to attack, thinking to himself this man was the strangest he'd ever met. Hyungwoo simply stood and observed, judging the incoming strike to be mediocre. He began to concentrate energy into his hands. A blue light began to erupt around Hyungwoo. He swung his arm, executing a powerful technique. Boom! A colossal pillar of light like a lightning bolt struck the center of the training yard, shaking the area. The Heavenly Thunder technique had been activated. Hyung Pyo was flung backward, crashing to the ground in shock. He realized this was absolutely not the ordinary three-chi sword technique. Lying flat on the ground, Hyung Pyo stared wide-eyed as Hyungwoo advanced. He was still reeling from the attack. Hyung Pyo stammered, asking what martial art that was. Hyung Woo nonchalantly replied that it was still the 3-chi sword technique, but the heavenly thunder move, and even asked if his opponent was in much pain. Hyung Pyo slumped down, admitting the blow was unlike any worldly martial art. He realized this porter was actually a hidden grandmaster. Hyung Woo looked down and reiterated once more that, in any case, his skill was a rank above Hyung Pyo's. Hyung Pyo laughed at the absurdity. He noted that although Hyung Woo was talented, his mind was innocent like a child's, utterly ignorant of social norms. Hyung Pyo extended his hand, declaring that rather than teaching him martial arts, he'd teach Hyung Woo manners so he wouldn't cause trouble in public. Hyung Woo stared at the offered hand in bafflement. Hyung Pyo had to demonstrate by hand that in this situation, he should take the hand to help someone up. Hyung Woo clumsily complied, beginning his first lessons in human life. At nightfall, Hyung Woo moved in to stay at Hyung Pyo's house. Hyung Pyo was horrified to find him sleeping upright and stiff as a corpse. By day, he diligently studied to read his first letters. The next morning in the courtyard, Hyung Woo casually began to take off his shirt to change, prompting Hyung Pyo to shout an alarm to stop him. He reminded him not to undress out in the open like that. When Hyung Woo attempted to remove his trousers as well, Hyung Pyo grew even more panicked. From afar, Mir Young was hiding behind a pillar, quietly observing the whole scene. Dugo Woon ordered surveillance of all movements of the Jo family. He suspected they were involved in the Greenwood Bandits' attack at Honon Stock and needed evidence to confirm it. Mir Young accepted the order and pledged to carry out the leader's wishes. She began to infiltrate and quietly observe from hidden corners. After watching for a while, the spy could only click her tongue and remarked that Miss Soleon had strange taste for keeping an eye on that pervert who stripped in the courtyard. Up above, Soleon looked at Hyung Woo with hopeful eyes. She was pleased that he had truly integrated and become an official member of the Hainan escort agency. The day of departure for the important escort finally arrived. Sima Chao gave thorough instructions, wishing everyone to complete the mission and return safely. Ma Yuk led the escort, proclaiming boldly that he would protect the cargo. Shouts rang out as the men and horses began to set off. The heavy wagon started rolling out of the escort agency's gate. The whole team was in intense focus for the risky journey ahead. And so, Dan Hyung Woo's true foray into the martial world officially began with this first escort. A few days earlier, in the main hall of the Jo household, a group of young men from the Murim alliance arrived requesting an audience with the head of the family. Head of the Jo family, Jo Il-yeon, stepped forward to receive them with courtesy, not forgetting to extend greetings to the Murim leader. Recognizing a familiar face, he welcomed Pying Kalyong, the young master of the Pying family from Hebei, famed as the Sword Dragon. Young Master Namgoon Jin also introduced himself, accompanied by his beautiful younger sister Paeyang Mir Young. Jo Il-yeon praised the prestigious lineage of his honored guests lavishly, silently thinking that Mir Young would make a perfect match for his son Jo In. He invited the young masters to tea and suggested that, on this occasion, they exchange martial techniques with his sons to strengthen friendly ties. However, this was merely a facade, for the Murim alliance had actually sent them to find evidence of whether the Jo family was colluding with the bandit Lulu. While the young masters were busy showing off, Pan Kolyong could not take his eyes off Miss Jo Seolyeon. Seeing her brother love-struck, Mir Young teased that Miss Soleon hadn't glanced at him even once and had been staring only at that lowly porter over there. Soleon scoffed confidently, certain that the upcoming escort mission would be the perfect chance to win the beauty's heart. Meanwhile, Dan Hyung Woo paid no attention to his surroundings. He was focusing all his attention on a piece of greasy roasted meat. After 10 relentless years in the caves, for him, a properly cooked meal was the greatest joy in life at that moment. Hyung Pyo shook his head at the man's excessive appetite and warned him to prepare himself, since the road to Sichuan ahead would be very arduous. In the distance, Tang Hogwan, an elder of great authority from the Sichuan Tang clan, watched the group silently. Alongside him was Tang Shouji, another member of the Sichuan Tang clan with cold, sharp eyes. This time, in addition to the escorts from the Hainan escort agency, the Tang sect had dispatched its most elite guards to protect this secret shipment. Hyung Woo continued leisurely eating his meat, completely unaware that top experts were watching him. Tang Ho Wan suddenly sensed a gentle yet profound spiritual energy, and he used his spiritual power to crush a butterfly as a test. The old man frowned in astonishment. He was certain someone of extraordinary power was hiding among those lowly porters. The elder's gaze swept across the crowd, trying to find the person possessing the unusual energy. At that moment, Maoyuk, the lead escort of the Hanan escort agency, rode up with an overwhelming presence. Maoyuk announced that all preparations were complete, leading Tang Hogwan to mistake the spiritual aura he had sensed as emanating from this expert. Although he still felt something was off, the elder set the thought aside and ordered the group to depart hastily. Maoyuk shouted the escort agency's speed slogan, demanding the entire caravan complete the 4-month route in only 1.5 months. Hyung Pyo anxiously told Hyung Woo to keep up with the horses. If they displeased Maoyuk, they would lose this job. Hyung Woo found this puzzling. He couldn't imagine how one could fall behind once Maoyuk began spurring the horses forward. This trip was notorious for its brutality because even the porters were forced to run at speeds comparable to war horses. Yet Young-woo strode with extreme lightness, as if he were merely taking a leisurely walk in his own garden. For 4 days and nights without rest, Hyung-pyo was stunned to see this man still running full speed while his eyes remained tightly shut as if sleeping. Finally, the caravan reached Mount Pingding. Suddenly, a wind-splitting sound rang out as a spear hurtled from somewhere. The spear plunged into the ground right in front of the path, causing a small tremor that kicked up a cloud of dust. Mayuk, startled, tightened the reins on his horse and shouted loudly, demanding to know who dared block the escort bureau's route. A band of mountain bandits with fierce faces emerged from the bushes, surrounding the escort with weapons raised. Tang Hogwan quietly ordered further observation, while Hyung-pyo reassured Hyung-woo that paying toll money to these Greenwoods bandits would be enough. Mayuk took out a large string of coins and hurled it forward, telling the bandits to take it and quickly step aside so the caravan could pass. The leader of the Greenwoods bandits scoffed at the small change and brazenly declared he would spare them only if he could take all the goods on the carts. Without further negotiation, the bald giant swung his great blade and leapt down from the cliff in a powerful attack. Hyung-pyo panicked at the suddenness of the assault, while Hyung-woo stood there calmly, clearly sensing the murderous intent erupting from the bandit. The devastating aerial strike left Mayuk with no time to react. The bald man added a vicious kick, sending Mayuk crashing to the ground. He laughed triumphantly, despising the Henan escort agency, and ordered his men to wipe them out. The porters trembled before the overwhelming number of bandits, while Tang Hogwan calmly asked who was behind them. The leader thumped his chest, proclaiming himself a hero of the Greenwoods bandits, and charged forward to finish off the old man in the conical hat. Tang Hogwan sneered, then suddenly launched a fine needle imbued with a dark purple force. The tiny needle pierced its target and embedded itself in the ancient tree behind. The bandit leader collapsed on the spot, not even understanding what had happened. The remaining bandits stared in shock as the old man leisurely prepared another handful of needles. He waved his hand, and a rain of needles flew out, clearing the thugs in an instant. But the peace was short-lived. A squad of assassins in black masks suddenly emerged from the forest. They were from Vile Phantom Hall, professional killers far more brutal than the earlier bandits. Recognizing they faced real adversaries, Tang Hogwan warned everyone sternly to brace themselves. He ordered his elite guards to protect the cargo at all costs, regardless of their lives. The battle erupted as the assassins lunged with terrifying speed and killing intent. Mayuk and his men struggled to hold formation, but began to be overwhelmed by the masked one's skill. Young-woo watched silently from within the encirclement, his expression oddly calm. Blood spilled everywhere as the escort party repeatedly faltered under the enemy's coordinated strikes. Young-pyo was put in a perilous position, a blade raised behind him. Seeing that, Hyung-woo recalled the fragrant bowl of braised pork in the man's kindness. His gaze suddenly shifted. A surge of blue force began to erupt powerfully. A thunderous blast rang out as a massive electric current from Hyung-woo repelled the assassin just as he struck. The battlefield froze for a moment. The enemies were stunned, unsure where the thunderous blast had come from. Hyung-pyo still looked bewildered, asking if Hyung-woo had been the one to use the heavenly thunder. Hyung-woo admitted he helped because the man had treated him well before, but he wondered why he should save the others. Moved by the trembling comrade's desperate plea, Hyung-woo finally nodded. He surged forward, his body becoming a blurred ghost amid the chaos. Mayuk and the others only felt a strong gust sweep past, clearing those who had cornered them. Even Tang Hogwan, struggling to cope, was astonished to see Hyung-woo flash by. The assassin leader moved to strike Tang Hogwan, but suddenly realized the real opponent was right behind him. Hyung-woo's speed surpassed the sight of any master present. With a single crisp command, Hyung-woo unleashed a wide area of force, wiping out the entire Vile Phantom Hall squad. He reined in his power, leaving behind a ravaged scene and an eerie silence. News of this disastrous defeat was quickly reported back to the leader, Woman Hager. The trembling subordinate explained about a mysterious master beyond the organization's expectations. Instead of anger, Woman Hai smiled with keen interest and decided to personally investigate this terrifyingly powerful figure. At the Woman clan estate, a colossal financial power, even though not one of the 5 great martial families. Clan head Woman Huang was listening to a report that the Sichuan Tang family had just successfully manufactured thunderclap bombs and hired the Henan escort agency to transport them. He realized the Hua family were in fact descendants of the thunderclap sect, the ones who possessed the secret technique to craft this terrifying explosive weapon. With such a large quantity of ammunition, blowing away a few minor sects would be as easy as turning his hand. Huang's eyes hardened. He crushed the bird in his hand, conceiving a plan to seize both the shipment and the manufacturing formula for himself. But the next piece of news shocked him. Woman Hai had eavesdropped and had left with the Ghost Electric faction at some point. Woman He was riding at the head of a group, charging straight toward Mount Pingding. At the battle scene, corpses lay everywhere. The Henan escort agency suffered heavy losses, with only Mayuk gravely wounded and escort master Hyung Pao still conscious. The porters were pale with fear. and Tang Klg worried the convoy couldn't continue, intending to hire another escort company. But Tang Hoguan brushed it off, insisting they proceed to the end. His accompanying grandson, assuming the old man had just swept away the enemy with heavenly thunder, flattered him profusely. He snorted, saying he himself had nearly failed to perceive that move, so how could he have used it? He pointed directly at Dan Hyunwoo, asserting that this porter was the one who truly struck the blow. Tang blocked his path and bluntly asked which school Hangwoo belonged to, that his martial skill was so fearsome. Hyungwoo recalled the past in hell, where Cheonjicha threw them into death to let them self-extinguish. His martial art was forged through survival and death. He replied coldly that he had no master or sect or place where he had learned martial arts. The indifferent answer angered Tang Hoguan, who felt the boy was being disrespectful to his elders. Hyunpyo saw tensions rising and intervened, explaining that Hyungwoo had lived on the mountain for a long time and didn't understand worldly ways. Tang suppressed his anger. He recognized Hyungwoo's arrogance but admitted the man's strength was real, and he seemed to heed Hyungpyo. He turned to Hyungpyo and ordered that from now on he would act on behalf of the wounded Mayuk to lead the convoy to the end. Hyungpyo froze in surprise. While Mayuk strained to say he would return to the escort bureau to call for reinforcements, Mayuk instructed Hyungpyo to shoulder the responsibility of guiding everyone. Hyungpyo accepted the order, and Teen decided to rest for one night and set out again the next morning. Shulji still couldn't believe that taciturn porter was a hidden master. Meanwhile, Mayuk rode alone through the night to return and report to the escort bureau. He worried that if the enemy kept attacking, the whole convoy would hang by a thread. As he rode, he felt something tailing him. A metal chain appeared in his vision. With a violent tug, he was flung from his horse in pain. The attackers were a band of masked assassins. They landed and surrounded the fallen prey. They were the Ghost Masked Assassins, an elite hit team belonging to the Blood Demon organization. Their leader declared they had cleaned up this group, and their next target would be the Zhou family's mansion. At the Zhou mansion, head of the family, Zhou Ilyan was diligently working at the calligraphy desk with Sima Cheol. As Zhou Ilyan tried to finish writing, a drop of black ink suddenly fell, signaling an ill omen. A dense killing intent surged in, and the ink blot on the paper spread like a pool of black blood. A scream rang out outside. The Zhou household's retainers were slaughtered before they could react. Assassins poured in like a flood, ordered to kill every single person without mercy. Sima Cheol, overseeing the estate, drew his sword to meet them, his face filled with righteous fury at the sudden attack. But Zhou Ilyong called him back. He felt the murderous aura was too terrifying, far beyond what they could easily resist. The slaughter unfolded brutally right in the Zhou courtyard. Jungchan rushed inside in a panic to look for his niece amid the chaos. He ordered Miss Zhou Seleon to gather her things and flee immediately, leaving everything behind to save her life. Outside, shrill cries for help echoed through the night, which glowed red with fire. The demon-masked assassins kept swinging their swords, slaughtering innocents. Amid the rubble, Miss Zhou Seleon, Uncle, and Zhou-in urged their horses and fled in a frantic gallop. They had to get away at all costs before the monsters caught up. Glancing back, Miss Sulian was aghast to see her family's entire estate, now nothing but a raging sea of flames. Uncle shouted for her not to stop, but her heart twisted because her father was still trapped in that blood-soaked ring. Zhou Ilhyun, head of the Zhou household and the foremost spearmaster in Hanam, tightened his long spear, ready for a final stand. Alone he held firm before the main gate, sweeping his spear to block dozens of demon-masked killers surging forward like a tide. The assassins faltered at the overwhelming presence of the head of the household. They realized this was not an easy target. Take his head, the kill order rang out. Zhou Ion was surrounded on all sides, yet his spearwork remained fiercely valiant amid the crowd's murderous red aura. In the deep woods, Uncle screamed at Sulian to trust her father's ability and keep running. Zhou-in nodded in agreement, saying their most urgent task now was to report this to the Marine Alliance as soon as possible. However, the killing intent behind them drew nearer. Choliang gritted his teeth. Clearly they were being driven into a corner. Sima Chuel suddenly recalled the porter who once single-handedly defeated the Greenwoods bandits. If anyone could save them now, it would be Dan Hyungwoo. He clasped his hands in prayer for the group's safety, while ahead lay only impenetrable darkness. Come on, miss. If we find Hyungwoo, we'll have a chance to live. Their only hope was pinned on that mysterious young man. Soleon ran and wept, prayers for her father choking in her throat as the fire behind faded into the distance. Back at the manor, Zhou Ilyan was now covered in blood, breathing raggedly but still clutching his spear. The assassins stood around him like waiting phantoms. A cold, mocking laugh rang out from the darkness. The figure behind the veil emerged and asked if he wanted to know the true reason for this massacre before he died. Show yourself, Ilyan roared. Immediately, a swirl of crimson demonic chi began to coalesce. A single blood-red eye full of hatred appeared. He was Bloodshadow, bearing an age-old grudge against the legend Chen Yizhe. Nearby, subordinate reported that the assassins were relentlessly hunting down the remaining members of the Zhou clan. Bloodshadow sneered at the ashes. He did not hide his intent to annihilate everything related to his old enemy. He reiterated the inextricable bond between himself and Shane Jija. This Zhou estate was where Qian Gija once chose to build forces to oppose him years ago. With a cruel smile, Blood Shadow declared that destroying this clan was the first step toward crushing his opponent's entire plan. His grin twisted further, showing his glee at seeing the last of the Zhou blood about to run dry. Back in the forest chase, Sima Qiol panicked when he realized the enemy had crept up right behind them. Zhou panted. His stamina had reached its limit after the long, hard pursuit. Seeing the danger, he shouted for Uncle to take the miss and go ahead while he stayed behind to cover their retreat. But before they could react, a hooked chain blade shot out of the darkness, piercing straight through Zhou body and making him scream in agony. Zhou was flung off his horse, blood spraying into the black night to the shock of his companions. The demon-masked assassins leaped out from the bushes. Solian screamed in desperation when she saw her brother fall. Her horse was slashed and fell, throwing her to the ground. Everything happened so fast and so cruel. Uncle was also gravely wounded, collapsed on the ground, looking at Solian with eyes full of remorse for failing to protect her. Solian sank to her knees, trembling as she watched the assassins close in. Death loomed nearer than ever. The killer raised his sword, preparing to end the weak young lady's life. In that final moment, Solian could only scream and call Hyungwoo's name as if begging for a miracle. Suddenly, a cold blue-white spiritual aura erupted, shattering the assassin's blade the instant it came down. Dan Hyungwoo appeared from nowhere, radiating the overwhelming presence of a demon god. Solian looked up, disbelieving her eyes as she saw her savior had arrived. His gaze was cold as he looked straight at her and said softly, "I heard your call." Back a little, the convoy of the Henan escort agency was still trudging through the night in the old forest. Dan Hyungwoo suddenly halted, his ears as if catching a strange frequency. Jo Seolian's cry for help echoed in his mind. Hyung Pyo, walking beside him, also stared in bewilderment, asking what was happening. "I'll be right back." He left just those words and immediately sprinted away. Hyungwoo's speed left the rest far behind. He felt that call was very close. In another corner of the forest, the masked assassin swung a crimson blade, preparing to finish off the last drop of the Zhou bloodline. A streak of blue tore through the night. The assassin's sword shattered instantly, to his astonishment. Hyungwoo appeared as if rising from the ground, his presence completely overwhelming those before him. "I heard you call," he declared coldly. The assassins froze, not understanding who this interrupter was to possess such abnormal power. Solian's uncle was now breathing faintly. With his last breaths, he urged Hyungwoo to protect her. Seeing the plan unravel, the leader screamed orders for the group to rush in and hack Hyungwoo to pieces. But he paid them no mind, gently placing his hand on Solian's head to reassure her. That touch seemed to dispel all the fear surrounding a little girl. "This will be over soon," Hyungwoo said casually, as if about to go for a stroll. He moved like a ghost, leaving behind the horrific screams of assassins struck by a skill they had never seen. His gaze was unwavering. The killing intent he radiated was bone-chilling. In the blink of an eye, nearly 20 assassins were reduced to dust. Solian stood frozen, thinking that if she had been that strong, perhaps her family would not have fallen apart. Hyungwoo stood before the freshly dug grave for Solian's relatives, and vowed to let him rest in peace. The lost young lady asked him what she should do now that no one was left by her side. That question accidentally touched Hyungwoo's memory. He had also been the only one to crawl out of that hell alone. He looked straight into Solian's eyes and released a single word: live. He urged her to live for herself, to repay those who had fallen. Solian seemed to find her purpose again, and begged to join his escort. Hyungwoo did not refuse. He told her to hold tightly to him. No sooner had he finished speaking than the two shot off, flying over the treetops. Solian felt as if she were gliding on layers of clouds. This speed was truly beyond the imagination of an ordinary person. She secretly admired the strength of this man. Her uncle had been a master, yet the assassins who killed him were swept away like trash by this man. Solian couldn't contain her curiosity and asked how he could be so impossibly strong at such a young age. Hyungwoo's eyes deepened. He said he had to fight real monsters. Memories of the Gate of Hell surfaced, where he had to step over the corpses of 99 friends to survive. All that suffering had been orchestrated by Shane Jija, but sadly he was already dead, so he couldn't take revenge with his own hands. The two of them finally returned to where the escort convoy was encamped. Hyungwoo cut the conversation short, believing it wasn't the right time to go deeper. The moment Hyung Pyo saw Seolian, he cried out in panic, unable to believe the young lady had survived. But immediately after, he brought shocking news. There were reports that the old monster Qian Jija might not actually be dead. A murderous light flared in Hyungwoo's eyes. If that old man was still alive, then his hunt was truly just beginning. Dan Hyungwoo and Jo Seolian pressed on relentlessly, charging forward to regroup. Finally, they met the last escort group of the Hainan escort agency. Young Pyo was stunned to see Miss Jo still alive. Upon hearing that the Zhou clan and the escort office headquarters had been wiped out, Hyung Pyo was shocked and could hardly believe it. Su Lian bowed and apologized for bringing such grim news while everyone was on duty. Hyung Pyo could only offer consolation, knowing she was the one suffering the most right now. The escort's morale was visibly shattered. Hyung Pyo understood that if nothing was done, the mission would be lost. He spoke up to encourage them, just complete this delivery and the huge commission will be enough to rebuild the escort office, especially now that the young lady is here. Seeing Hyung Pyo's resolve, Solian vowed not to drown in grief. She wanted to become strong like Hyungwoo. Hyungwoo reminded them to depart. The escort troop pulled themselves together and resumed their journey. Tang Hogwan told his subordinates to focus on the mission. He didn't care who Hyungwoo brought along as long as he kept traveling with the group. While moving, Seolion recalled what Hyungwoo had told her about his past battles with monsters. She curiously asked more about the place he had mentioned, but Hyungwoo himself didn't know its name. The conversation suddenly turned to Cheonjia. Solion insisted the underworld rumor was that he had died 10 years ago. Hyungwoo fell silent. If he really were dead, who could settle this blood debt? Hyun Pyo interjected, admitting he didn't believe Cheongija was dead because too many things didn't add up. He thought the rumor had been spread deliberately so that everyone would accept it as truth. A shadowy figure appeared in Hyung Pyo's account, the one pulling the strings behind all the rumors. Seolion wondered why a master would go to such lengths. Hyung Pyo guessed perhaps he wanted to avoid the world's attention. Suspicions mounted that Cheonjicha himself might have spread the story of his own death. Hyungwoo's eyes grew cold when he heard the 10-year time frame. The caravan suddenly stopped. A luxurious Wooman clan carriage blocked the road with a broken wheel. Wooman clan retainers hurriedly apologized and asked if their young lady could ride along for a stretch. Tang Hogwan eyed the carriage's insignia warily. He sensed something off about the breakdown occurring just when word of the cargo might have leaked. Wooman Ha stepped out of the carriage, radiant in beauty, introducing herself as the daughter of the Wooman clan head. The escorts were dumbstruck by her beauty. Hyungwoo, however, found her overly loud. Wooman Ha used the charm of a beauty. Each of her gestures seemed designed to enchant those around her. Even the elder Tang Hogwan lost focus, eyes fixed on the beauty and forgetting to stay vigilant. Taking advantage of the moment, Wooman He lightly jumped up and sat directly on the goods carriage. Hyung Pyo hesitated to stop her because the cargo wagon forbade outsiders, but the expressions of those around him made it hard to object. Tang Hogwan blushed and agreed to let her ride along to the next village. Hyung Pyo was speechless to see even the elder enchanted. The beauty smiled sweetly in thanks, sending a thrill through the nearby porters. Although Tang Hogwan suggested she move to the lead carriage for comfort, but Wooman Hai still insisted on sitting on the goods carriage. The old man clicked his tongue and let it pass, telling himself that as long as Hyungwoo guarded them, the cargo would be safe. Wooman Hai's smile carried a hint of mystery. Once settled, Wooman Hai secretly used concealed acoustic transmission to contact her accomplices. She judged the escort as extremely lax. Except for the old man Tang Hogwan, there was no one worth worrying about. The target was 5 thunderclap bomb carts right under her feet. Thunderclap bombs were the destructive weapons that had made a name for themselves. They could wipe out an entire sect in an instant. This incendiary had vanished for hundreds of years along with that sect's decline. Yet now it had suddenly reappeared in the Jiang. Wooman Hai wondered who had used them to annihilate the vile Phantom Hall assassins without leaving a trace. Her gaze met Hyungwoo's. He was a porter carrying a sword, and crucially, he gave no sign of being skilled in martial arts. She felt insulted that since her arrival he hadn't even spared her a glance. When Hyungwoo turned to look, Wooman Ye froze. His look was so cold it made her tremble, an absolute indifference she had never encountered in her life. The humiliation drove her into a furious rage. She swore by any means necessary to make Dan Hyungwoo kneel at her feet and beg forgiveness. Night had fallen. The group made camp to rest after a tiring day on the road. Dan Hyunwoo stood apart in a corner while the other escorts dozed by the fire. Sulian brought a steaming bowl of meat soup and cheerfully invited him to dinner. But before he could eat, Woo Man-yai appeared. She asked Hyungwoo to follow her into the woods for a private conversation. The young lady deliberately used superior lightness skill, wanting to see if this porter could catch up. Woo Man-hai was smug, thinking her footwork would leave him breathless and disappointed. But when she turned back, she froze to see Hyungwoo standing right in front of her. She couldn't believe he could catch up so fast and make no sound at all. Hearing the young lady's startled cry, the guards and Solion rushed into the forest in alarm. Sulian called Hyungwoo's name anxiously, fearing something bad had happened. In the woods, Woo Man-hai was still shaken. She trembled as she asked the true identity of the man before her. Hyungwoo coldly told her to hurry up because his bowl of meat soup was about to get cold. Seeing Woo Man-hee unable to answer, Hyungwoo turned his back and walked away to be done with it. Offended by his rudeness toward the young lady, the guard Youngsa angrily drew his sword to attack. Woo Man-hai shouted to stop him, but it was too late. Hyungwoo's gaze suddenly turned extremely cold. In an instant, Hyungwoo vanished before them, leaving only faint streaks of blue air in the space. When Solion arrived, she was stunned to find the bowl of soup in her hands had flown away. She turned to see Hyungwoo calmly slurping the soup beside her. He nodded in satisfaction that the soup was still hot, while Solian still didn't understand what had happened. Solian curiously asked about Wu Munhee. He casually replied that the girl would return once she got bored. Seeing Hyungwoo eating nonchalantly, Solian suddenly stammered, wanting his opinion on her looks. The young woman blushed and waited, hoping for a compliment from the mysterious man. Instead, he bluntly said she was not as beautiful as Miss Woman. Seeing Celian's face fall, he added that he didn't like beautiful women because that kind of charm often came with death. From a distance, Wu Munhee watched the conversation and quietly confirmed that this was the master who had wiped out Vile Phantom Hall. She decided to follow and observe further to learn what kind of person Dan Hyungwoo truly was. The next morning, the Hanan escort agency convoy resumed its journey, heading for Sichuan. Hyungpyo warned Jo Solian to be extremely careful because the atmosphere around them was growing very strange. Elder Tang Hogwan also sensed the tension enveloping the entire caravan. He was worried about the Black Viper sect, a rising force that directly threatened the Tang clan's reputation. Suspecting a traitor within, Tang Hogwan suddenly halted when he heard a sound in the bushes. Hyungwoo casually announced that about 100 enemies were lying in ambush ahead. Wu Munhee was stunned. She couldn't believe he could count the enemies' numbers so precisely by feel alone. No sooner had the words left his mouth than dozens of Black Viper sect henchmen burst from the woods in a frenzied attack. Hyungwoo stood still, counting silently, realizing only half the enemy force had revealed themselves. Tang Hogwan leapt into the fray and ordered Hyungwoo to hold his ground and protect the cargo. Hyungpyo anxiously asked if the elder could hold his own. Hyungwoo assured him he would win. As expected, Tang Hogwan easily cut down the small fry, proving the strength of a Tang clan grandmaster. Wu Munhee and her followers watched from a distance, their faces betraying annoyance at the plan's disruption. Yusa whispered into the young lady's ear via sound transmission, suggesting they retreat because the enemy was too strong. Wu Munhee nodded in agreement, thinking withdrawal was the wisest choice. But Hyungwoo suddenly turned and spoke directly into their ears. If they wanted to leave, go ahead. He wouldn't stop them. Yusa was horrified to realize he had just broken their secret sound transmission technique. The horrific truth became clear. Dan Hyungwoo not only heard them, but could also intercept the secret transmission frequency that no one could penetrate. Wu Munhee gaped in shock when she realized her sound transmission technique had been eavesdropped on so easily. Hyungwoo issued a chilling threat. If they did not retreat, he would kill them all. Realizing the opponent was not bluffing, Wu Munhee immediately ordered Youngsa to relay the withdrawal at once. She smiled meaningfully, silently thanking Hyungwoo for giving her people a way out instead of slaughtering them. While the Wuman faction withdrew, Hyungwoo remained standing there with a pensive look. He sensed another murderous aura, even more terrible, approaching. Earlier, Tang Hogwan had easily wiped out the Black Viper sect's vanguard along the route, but a masked assassin hiding in the shadows revealed that the previous attack had only been bait. They waited for the caravan to be at its most careless to unleash their main force, the Crimson Moon Corps. Everything was unfolding according to the cruel plan the assassins had devised. Youngsa led the troops retreat safely. At the same time, Hyungwoo noticed that the disgusting murderous aura was growing denser. Night fell and the caravan stopped to camp in the forest. Jo Seulian and Hyungpyo sat down to talk. Ms. Jo expressed remorse that she was the only one sleeping comfortably in the carriage while everyone else had to stand guard. She recalled the carefree days before and realized she had underestimated how hard escort work truly was. Determined to change, Solian wanted to stay awake with the escorts to truly share their hardships. Hyungwoo stood at a distance, silently observing the conversation. Her eyes burned with resolve as she declared she would become a true caravan master and shoulder the future of the escort bureau herself. Hyungwoo suddenly appeared and reminded her that to be a caravan master she had to start with the smallest tasks like carrying loads. Solian was stunned for a moment, then quickly asked Hyungwoo to teach her how to become a first-rate porter. Seeing his lady mature so rapidly, Hyungpyo couldn't hide his emotion and pride. Scene shifts to the Crimson Moon Corps, an elite assassin organization the Black Viper sect poured all its resources into training. They were not only skilled at hiding but also capable of coordinated simultaneous attacks, finishing targets in the blink of an eye. While the entire escort caravan slept, Hyungwoo stayed awake to watch for any disturbances. He glanced at Solian sleeping soundly, then turned his face toward the deep woods where the enemy lurked. Red eyes flared in the darkness. The leader ordered the entire Crimson Moon Corps to prepare to strike. Hyungwoo spoke calmly, exposing the enemy's hiding spots just as they were about to move. Unfazed, he began a countdown from 1 to launch the massacre. Hyungwoo struck in a flash as soon as he reached 2, leaving the enemies no time to react. The final count sounded, and the assassins sprang forward to wipe everyone out. Their top target was Tang Hogwan, believed to be the strongest master in the caravan. The leader laughed triumphantly, certain the thunderclap bombs would soon belong to the Black Viper sect. But his sword stroke was intercepted by Hyungwoo with extreme ease. He looked around in shock. Why were the escorts unharmed, and why was there no sound from their companions? Hyungwoo coldly revealed that the entire Crimson Moon Corps had already been wiped out by him. and he was the last one left alive. With a brilliant surge of blue energy, he immediately finished off the leader. The costly, elaborate plan of the Crimson Moon Corps collapsed completely at the hands of the demon god. Tang Hoguan jolted awake to find assassin corpses strewn across the forest edge. Hyung Pyo reported that the enemy had plotted a night ambush, but Hyungwoo had dealt with them all. Soleon looked at Hyungwoo with eyes full of gratitude. Once again, he had silently protected the caravan's lives. The next morning, the caravan resumed its journey, officially entering Sichuan province. After so many trials, they arrived at their destination safely without further hindrance. The escorts sighed in relief, longing for a proper drink after the perilous trip. Soleon turned to ask Wu Manhai about her next plans now that they had arrived. Wu Manhai smiled and replied that when the time came she would leave on her own. Soleon watched her go with visible irritation at her mysteriousness. Hyun Pyo stepped closer and suggested that when in Sichuan, Hyungwoo should visit Ak's place, since it wasn't far from the Tang clan. He repeated the dying friend's request that Hyungwoo had once mentioned. The image of Ak Segi came to mind, the close friend who had sacrificed himself and left a belated apology to his father. Hyungwoo's gaze hardened with resolve. He decided to carry out that final wish immediately. After a long, dusty journey, the Henan escort agency finally set foot in the treacherous land of Sichuan. The elderly master in charge handed over the payment pouch, not forgetting to praise the group's hard work. Receiving the payment for the first time as chief of the escort bureau, Zhou Soleon felt awkward, the clan's responsibility now resting on her shoulders. Looking at the pouch in her hands, she recalled the devastation of the Zhou clan and vowed to be strong for those who remained. Hyung Pyo stepped forward to comfort the young lady. He believed the bureau's affairs would improve from now on. Soyeon wiped her tears, nodded with a smile, and entrusted her faith to her loyal teammate. Elsewhere, Wu Manhai's subordinates discussed retreating after their mission to steal thunderclap bombs had completely failed. But Wu Manhai dismissed that idea. Her new target was the mysterious Dan Hyungwoo. On this side, the escort bureau members' gazes all turned to Hyungwoo, the savior who had silently protected them throughout the journey. They admired the young man's prowess, even though he always wore an inscrutable cold expression. Hyung Pyo inquired about news and learned that the Ak family's mansion was not far from here. Upon hearing this, Hyungwoo immediately used lightness skill to leap onto the roof, deciding to search for clues through the night. He sensed a familiar spiritual force identical to that of his old friend Ak Segi. Night had fallen. While the escorts eagerly bathed and rested, Suleon wondered where the two of them were going. Suleon chased after them, but Hyungwoo told her he would explain everything when he returned. Hyungwoo placed his hand on Soleon's head, sending a warm current of inner energy to calm her before leaving. He left a promise to return soon, then he and Hyung Pyo faded into the darkness. As they moved, Hyung Pyo felt something amiss, sensing someone tailing them closely. The tail was Wu Manhai. She persistently followed the target, unaware she had been noticed. Hyungwoo thought silently that Hyung Pyo's current speed was still too slow to shake off their follower completely. Suddenly he placed his hand on Hyung Pyo's back, directly transferring his inner strength into his comrade's body. Hyung Pyo was astonished as his legs felt weightless and he surged forward at incredible speed. Wu Manhai froze as the two of them accelerated so quickly she completely lost their trail. In an instant, they left the pursuer far behind and headed straight for the outskirts of Chengdu. Their destination was the expansive mansion of the Ak family. The place was eerily silent. The gate had not a single guard in sight. A dry creak of the gate echoed as a tall man stepped out from within, his face cold. Hyungwoo recognized that the man bore a strong resemblance to his friend. Hyung Pyo immediately asked whether the man knew anyone named Ak Segi. At the mention of that name, the man's eyes flared red and a murderous aura burst forth. The murderous pressure was so intense that Hyung Pyo gasped, feeling as if his lungs were being crushed. Hyungwoo immediately stepped forward to shield Hyung Pyo, using deep inner power to dispel the crimson pressure. Hyungwoo's intervention enraged Ak Wong. The old man already had his hand on his sword hilt. Faced with the opponent's fury, Hyungwoo's gaze remained cold, ready to face any attack. Ak Wong snarled, asking why Hyungwoo hadn't even dodged the blow. Hyung Pyo, standing nearby, scrambled to explain that there was a misunderstanding because Hyungwoo was actually Ak Segi's friend. At the words Segi's friend, Ak Wong froze in astonishment. Hyungwoo calmly confirmed his identity, while Hyung Pyo hastily excused himself, saying he'd lived on a mountain too long to know proper social etiquette. Ak Wong introduced himself as Ak Segi's uncle, the nephew who had been missing for 10 long years. He stared intently at Hyungwoo, demanding to know where he'd met him. In his heart, he recalled that hellish time. To him it felt like 100 years, yet it turned out only 10 brief years had passed in the mortal world. Ak Wong lost his patience and shouted, demanding to know his nephew's whereabouts immediately. Hyungwoo looked the old man straight in the eye, ready to speak the bluntest truth. Ak Segi is dead. Hyungwoo's short answer was accompanied by the image of Segi lying motionless in his memory. Unable to bear the shock, Ak Wong flew into a rage and swung his blade wildly. The sword sliced the air as it hurtled forward in Ak Wong's fury. Hyung Pyo, standing behind, could only gape in fear at the terrifying force. At that moment, Ms. Womanhai rushed out, shouting for them to stop. Her eyes were full of panic at the scene spiraling out of control. Ignoring the plea, Akwang still lunged forward. Guard Youngsa quickly warned the young lady because the situation was too dangerous. With one hand, Hyungwoo gently halted the razor-sharp blade just inches from the young lady's face. The girl stared in shock at his empty hand holding the blade back. He advised her there was no need to intervene. She could only exclaim in amazement, wondering how he could stop a sword with his bare hand like that. Akwang stood stunned as he realized the protective inner power around Hyungwoo had completely nullified his blade. He was baffled that, despite possessing such strength, the man hadn't fought back. The head of the Ak household, Ak Biwan, appeared with an imposing presence, and he scolded Akwang for his hot temper and rude conduct toward a distinguished guest right in front of the mansion. Akwang bowed in remorse, tears of anguish beginning to fall. The others fell silent as well, looking toward the mysterious young man. Biwan, pained, accepted the truth and invited Hyungwoo into the mansion to discuss matters more clearly. Hyungwoo once again affirmed, "My friend Ak Segi is dead." At another inn, Jo Silian rested her chin on her hand, worried because Hyungwoo and Hyung Pyo still hadn't returned. She suddenly remembered Hyungwoo's earlier gesture of concern. Suddenly, a scream rang out from below. A group of violent strangers had surrounded and attacked the inn without warning. Silian startled and ran out to see what was happening. At first, she thought drunken patrons were brawling, but the situation was far worse. A horrifying scene unfolded downstairs. A sect master was being slaughtered before the terrified crowd, fresh blood spraying everywhere. Solian quickly urged everyone in the inn to move inside to stay safe. She worried that if a full fight broke out without Hyungwoo here, it would be disastrous. Although their target wasn't the escort agency, the brutality of these men made her shudder. She wondered who they really were. Members of the Thunderclap sect tried to fight back, warning that the Tong clan would not let this pass. But the attackers showed no fear at all. The leader of the Black Viper sect sneered, mocking that the Tang clan were nothing but cowardly dogs when faced with his sect's might. He said he'd given them a chance, but they had chosen death. He ordered his men to kill every last one of them. The massacre took place brazenly in broad daylight. The Black Viper sect has recently risen in power, repeatedly clashing with the Tang clan and swallowing other forces in Sichuan. Solian stood on the upper floor, watching with a tense expression. The Black Viper boss looked up and saw Solian. He jeered, likening her to a beautiful flower lost in the shabby inn. A henchman flattered her and stepped forward, intending to use sweet words to take her back to his boss. Solian kept a cold expression, her eyes showing contempt. He threatened her, asking if she didn't know the consequences of falling under the Black Viper sect's notice. Solian remained silent, her hand already ready to act. In the blink of an eye, Solian closed in and decisively knocked the henchman to the floor. The impact was so strong he couldn't react in time. The boss was astonished to realize this flower had thorns. He froze at the young woman's swift counterattack. Solian proudly declared her identity as the eldest daughter of the Zhou family and the current branch chief of the Henan escort agency. Her gaze burned with resolve, challenging the entire Black Viper sect. After hearing that, the lackeys burst into mocking laughter. They thought it was the most ridiculous joke they'd ever heard from a young lady. He stepped close to her face and sneered that if she truly had such authority, he would have to treat her even more specially. Solian knew she couldn't win against the crowd in the cramped space. She swallowed her anger and decided to use all her inner strength to break through the encirclement. She dashed out the door as fast as a lightning bolt. The ringleader angrily shouted for his men to chase and catch her. They pursued her, laughing boisterously and taunting the young lady to run even faster. Meanwhile, at the Ok family estate, in Sichuan, Dan Hyungwoo and the others were attending an intimate drinking party. The head of the family, Ak Biwan, looked at Hyungwoo and solemnly spoke of his son, Ak Segi. He said that if Segi were alive, he would be the same age as him this year. Hyung Pyo was startled when he did the math and realized he was nearly twice the man's age. Biwan waved the matter aside and asked Hyungwoo to recount the truth about his son's death. Hyungwoo fell silent for a moment, then began to tell of the days in Hellgate. He affirmed that Segi was not only a comrade but a true friend. In his memory, amid the blood-soaked hellscape, Segi was wounded but still trying to smile. He told how the two of them vowed that whoever survived would find the other's family. Segai seemed to sense his fate. He asked Hyungwoo to seek out his father if he could not return. Segi's final words were a sincere apology to his aged father before he breathed his last in a pool of blood. Hyungwoo recounted that Segi had sacrificed his life so that he might have a chance to survive. Biwan fell silent, clenching his hand on the table in pain. The image of Segi happily waving goodbye as he set off years ago returned to him. Biwan choked up because it was the last time he had seen his son. Moved by the young man's sincerity, Biwan placed his hand on his chest and declared that from now on, the boy would also be his son. Everyone around froze. Hyung Pyo and Woo Man Hye couldn't believe their ears seeing the usually cold Hyungwoo so readily accepted as an adopted son. Hyungwoo did not refuse. He gave a slight smile and, for the first time, called out father. That call moved Akbi-wan to tears. He felt as if he were seeing Sigi's likeness in him. He burst into hearty laughter to dispel the somber atmosphere, praising Hyungwoo for his courage and demeanor, saying he was no less than his son. The party instantly grew lively. Fine wine was brought out in abundance at the host's command to celebrate the new member. Through the accounts of the attendees, Young Pyo learned more about the history of the Ak family. 10 years ago when Segi disappeared, the family had little renown in Sichuan. To forget the pain of losing his son, Akbi-wan threw himself into frenzied training, from which he developed the moon-destroying blade art that became world-famous. At that moment, Ak-won reminded everyone of the rise of the Black Viper sect, a force that was crazily expanding and absorbing smaller schools. Hyungpyo was startled to realize that it was the group that had been harassing them throughout the trip. B-won raised a cup of wine in celebration of his son. Hyungwoo also tasted the wine for the first time, wondering why this drink could so captivate people. As he drank, Hyungwoo suddenly sensed something amiss. He realized Jo Silleon was moving at great speed, a sign she was in danger. Without hesitation, he set the wine jar down and asked his father for permission to leave for a moment to handle something. No sooner had he spoken than Hyungwoo vanished like the wind, leaving the spinning wine jar on the table as Hyungpyo gaped. In the deep forest, Jo Silleon had been caught up by the Black Viper sect's men. They surrounded her with triumphant, leering smiles. Sulian panted, sweat pouring from exhaustion. She realized she was trapped with no escape. The boss stepped forward, sneering that she should give up and obediently allow herself to be tied up instead of resisting futilely. Just as he reached to touch her, a surge of blue force erupted from her body, flinging his hand aside. Both sides froze. Sulian suddenly recalled Hyungwoo ruffling her hair earlier. It turned out he had quietly passed a protective life energy into her then. He flushed with angry shame and immediately drew his sword to punish the insolent girl. The henchmen egged him on, shouting that he should tear her apart to satisfy their hatred. Sulian's sword had broken and the protective force had completely dissipated. She stood on the brink of utter despair, not wanting to be humiliated by them. Sulian closed her eyes, intending to kill herself to preserve her honor. In her heart she apologized to her father and brother for failing to avenge them. The moment the enemy's blade was about to strike, a brilliant purple light tore through the darkness. Hyungwoo appeared, intercepting the attack and reassuring her that he was not too late. Before he could even understand what was happening, a figure closed in on him. Dan Hyungwoo snapped the metal sword with one hand as easily as breaking a dry twig. Dust and smoke filled the air, blinding the surrounding henchmen. Jo Silleon stared up in shock, unable to believe her eyes when her savior appeared at her most desperate moment. Dan Hyungwoo looked down coldly and scolded her for having treated her own life so lightly. The leader of the Black Viper sect's men began to panic when he saw his trump card suddenly thwarted by a stranger. Ignoring their threats about his sect's reputation, he only asked Sulian never to repeat such a reckless act. The soldiers froze when a dense, murderous aura became visible on his face. Hyungwoo moved immediately, sending a powerful shock of force straight into the ground. The earth trembled violently, leaving the soldiers unable to stand. They screamed in terror as they witnessed the unimaginable scene before them. A gigantic earth dragon rose from the ground, crushing the entire enemy force in an instant. Sulian stood frozen, eyes wide with astonishment at the terrible power unfolding. Hyungwoo calmly explained this was the second discipline of the 3 energy arts, then invited her to finish their meal as if nothing had happened. In the Ak clan's main hall, the banquet was still in full, noisy swing. Only steward Yeonbaek was anxious, worried by Hyungwoo's sudden disappearance from the feast. The head of the household, Akbi-wan, was unconcerned. He declared he now regarded Hyungwoo as no less than his own son. Yeonbaek remained uneasy. He feared the Black Viper sect might take advantage of the situation to attack the estate. The thought that the enemy might exploit the master's affection to commit villainy constantly troubled him. And that worry proved well-founded as the Black Moon army was sweeping through the forest that night. Their leader ordered the complete annihilation of the Ak family that very night. But a massive bolt of lightning suddenly struck directly down upon their vanguard. Screams echoed through the forest as the unit was wiped out in the sea of blue electricity. Hyunwoo stood there with eyes blazing, declaring he would not let anyone spoil his father's mood. Sulian was bewildered when he suddenly mentioned a mysterious father. A guard who witnessed the scene was left shaking, saying the figure looked like a demon. He fled back to the manor at full speed to report the emergency. Upon hearing that the Black Moon Legion was attacking, Yeonbaek instantly changed color and the air around him grew chill. Akbi-wan slammed the table and rose, ordering a servant to bring a sword to prepare for battle. But seconds later, he was stunned when the soldier reported that the entire enemy force had been utterly destroyed. The trembling soldier insisted he had seen a demon slaughter the enemies with his own eyes. Akbi-wan still did not believe it. He gathered his energy fiercely and prepared to go out and verify it himself. But Dan Hyungwoo had appeared behind him before he knew it and gently greeted, "I'm home, father." Dan Wol was silent, listening as his subordinates reported the situation. He was stunned when he learned that both of his elite legions had been wiped out at the Ak clan. Hyungwoo single-handedly swept through his forces. The bodies of the Black Viper sect soldiers lay strewn among the weeds. No one remained alive. The report confirmed they had found the corpses of the Azura Moon Legion. Dan Wool flew into a rage, vowing to marshal the power of heavenly thunder to raze the Akka state to the ground. Early morning at the Aklan, Solion thanked them for their hospitality. The head of the family replied that since she was traveling with Hyangwoo, there was no need for formalities. Behind them, Woo Mun-hee watched the two with eyes full of jealousy and displeasure. She was annoyed, believing Hyangwoo cared only for that strange girl and was ignoring her. Ak Wong stepped forward to inquire, assuming she was Hyangwoo's fiancée, which only made her angrier. She snorted coldly, declaring she would forget all the unpleasantness of yesterday. Ak Wong approached and reminded Hyangwoo to greet Patriarch Ok Biwan before departing. He was in the training yard. Ok Biwan was absorbed in sword practice, his mind still heavy with thoughts of the previous night. When Hyangwoo and Solion arrived, Biwan curiously asked about the supreme martial art he was using. Hyangwoo admitted it was the 3-chi technique taught by Cheongija. Biwan was shaken upon hearing that name. He pressed to know whether Cheongija was Hyangwoo's master. Hyangwoo coldly denied it. To him, the old man was merely the enemy who had thrown him into hell. Biwan froze, even more shocked to learn that Cheongjia was the arch-enemy who had caused his son's death. Those around them recognized the irony. This martial art felt like a bitter compensation for the life of his lost son. Biwan swung his sword wildly. The enemy was also the benefactor who had indirectly helped the clan regain its strength. He howled in pain, smashing a wooden post with his fist. A decade of hatred suddenly became painfully complicated. Hyangwoo stepped forward to bid farewell. Only then did Biwan's gaze soften. He smiled, saying he would regard him as a second son and warned him to be very careful in the perilous world of martial artists. Hyangwoo nodded. Biwan sincerely hoped he would take care on the journey ahead. Back with their group, everyone at the Heenan escort agency anxiously ran out to greet Solion. Solion apologized for causing them worry. She resolved to return the entire troop to Henan to restore the escort service. Pio also voiced his support, promising to help her with everything he could. Suddenly, a member burst in, reporting the inn was surrounded by over 100 enemies. Solion turned pale. She realized the Black Viper had come to collect blood debt. While everyone panicked, Hyangwoo calmly uttered one sentence, "Good." He stepped onto the balcony and looked down at the savage crowd besieging below. Dan Wool leisurely sat drinking, ordering his men to massacre the inn to capture the woman. The soldiers below began to mock Hyangwoo, assuming he was a cowardly porter about to jump off the roof to kill himself. But Hyangwoo actually leapt. The Black Viper's henchmen hadn't even had time to understand what was happening. In an instant, thunder and electricity erupted in a blazing blue burst across the area. The soldiers below stared in horror as lightning flashed repeatedly. Standing amid the eye of the light storm, Hyangwoo said coldly, "From today on, Black Viper will vanish from this world." He single-handedly wiped out the remaining Black Viper troops causing trouble at Heenan Escort Agency. Everyone at the escort bureau worried when they saw Hyangwoo preparing to charge alone into the enemy stronghold. While the others were busy clearing the battlefield, one member of the bureau remained confident he would return safely. On the other side, the Black Viper sect was preparing to deploy the 3 true Heavenly Lightning to deal with a successive crisis. This type of incendiary weapon had tremendous destructive power, once even burning its own sect to the ground because it was too difficult to control. The Black Viper chief held the laughing bomb triumphantly, intending to use it to level the Tang clan and the Ak clan. He did not yet understand what was happening when a subordinate rushed in, breathless, to report disturbances outside the gate. Outside the headquarters, a lone figure strode up, dragging a prisoner who was crawling along the ground. Dan Hyangwoo looked at him with cold eyes, making him tremble and not dare to lift his head. He asked directly whether this was a Black Viper sect. The man hastily confirmed and begged him for mercy. Before Hyangwoo stood a massive complex of buildings laid out like a giant maze to deter intruders. The prisoner tried to explain that only insiders knew the real entrance, but Hyangwoo didn't bother to listen. He tossed the man aside like a toy, preparing to make his own way. Without searching for a door, Hyangwoo unleashed a powerful kick that shattered the fortress wall instantly. Hyangwoo coldly declared he would create his own path instead of following someone else's rules. Seeing the sturdy maze torn apart with bare hands, the Black Viper soldiers began to panic. The sect leader stared at the rubble in disbelief that anyone would dare to violently break his formation. He roared in outrage, unable to accept that a young man could threaten his entire sect. Faced with that overwhelming power, he suspected Hyangwoo was a master who had reached the realm of rejuvenation. An invisible shockwave swept through, flattening everything left in the main courtyard. Hyangwoo stepped in front of the sect leader and asked a brief question to confirm his identity. In desperation, the sect leader decided to pull out the true Heavenly Lightning and gamble his life. He hurled the bomb toward Hyangwoo, hoping they would both be blown to pieces in the blast. A thunderous explosion erupted, fierce flames engulfing the entire central area. The sect leader laughed triumphantly amid the blaze, convinced no one could survive such a direct blast. But his smile died when Hyangwoo calmly walked out of the flames, softly calling, "Earth Dragon." The ground began to tremble violently as black rocks rose up, forming gigantic fangs. A colossal stone dragon materialized, opening its maw right before the sect leader, who stood frozen with fear. The dragon let out an earth-shredding roar and began finishing the destruction of the enemy stronghold. In an instant, the once formidable Black Vipers sect was completely wiped out under the hand of the demon god. Surviving henchmen fled while screaming in terror at a power far beyond human comprehension. The Earth Dragon ended the battle by devouring the sect leader along with all his wicked ambitions. After cleaning up, Hyungwoo seized the 2 remaining bombs and brought them back as spoils for the escort bureau. The Black Viper sect has been completely wiped out, leaving only a ruined heap of wreckage. Survivors began to tell of a demon in gray who single-handedly annihilated the entire guild. The shocking news quickly reached the Tang clan headquarters in Sichuan. Don Shansan, head of the Tang clan, pondered the report that a lone individual could destroy such a large sect. He could not believe such an absurd event had occurred right in his territory. Elder Tang Hoguan nodded in confirmation. He had verified the news himself from the survivors. Hoguan recalled the sight of Hyungwoo holding the bomb with a chillingly calm expression. He recounted everything Hyungwoo had done throughout the escort mission. Upon hearing this, Shansung immediately changed his mind. He wanted to recruit such a terrifying talent into the Tang clan. A dragon paired with the phoenix would be perfect, he said with a calculating smile. At the Hainan escort agency's rendezvous point, Hyungwoo kept an indifferent attitude as if nothing had happened. Everyone in the escort team cheerfully bid the locals farewell as they prepared to depart. Hyungwoo curled his lips slightly, as if thinking about the upcoming journey home. Meanwhile, at the Black Snake stronghold, their leader roared in fury upon hearing that the Black Viper sect had been destroyed. He could not accept that all their investments in Sichuan had gone up in smoke because of a stranger. A subordinate reported that the killer was a brat raised by Cheon Jiha, the clan's archenemy. The leader was stunned to learn the target was hiding under the guise of a porter for the escort agency. Even after using True Heaven Thunderboom, the men couldn't so much as touch a hair on his head. Even the manual he had bestowed was effortlessly countered. He vowed to crush every trace of King Hansage, starting with this audacious monster. On the escort side, the group officially began their journey back to Anan. Soleon mischievously held the bomb that Hyungwoo had taken from the enemy hideout. Hyungwoo casually explained he brought it back because it might be useful, while Soleon spun it like a toy. Hyung-kyo panicked and snatched the bomb, promising to store it carefully for the escort agency's future. Just as they were about to depart, the beautiful Woman Hai suddenly appeared before the group. She asked to travel with them to Anan. Hyungwoo agreed as long as she caused no trouble, which left Soleon standing nearby looking displeased. Woman Hai smiled suggestively. She seemed intent on claiming this handsome man. Suddenly, a loud shout rang out, ordering the Henan escort party to halt. Elder Tang Hogwan appeared with a friendly smile and approached the group. He offered to accompany them, saying he also had matters to attend to in Hunan. Hyung Pyo looked visibly delighted to have an elder of Tang clan's caliber joining his protection. At the Tang clan, Chon Song believed he had given his daughter a precious chance to decide her own fate. Accompanying the elder was Miss Tang Mun Young, an elegant young woman with brown hair and captivating green eyes. With another beauty joining them, Hyungwoo's journey back to Henan officially began. The procession of the Henan escort agency trudged on, but Jo Seon's heart was anything but calm. She kept her eyes on Miss Tang Mun Young, both beautiful and highly skilled in martial arts. Then there was Woman Hai, the head of the Woman clan. Her looks and prowess even slightly outshone the Tang girl. Suyeon wondered why such great beauties would agree to follow a small escort agency like hers. Clearly, all their attention was focused on a single person. That person was Dan Hyungwoo. Though his appearance was unremarkable, every master's gaze was fixed on him. Tang Mun Young stepped forward, trying to break the silence with some small talk. She wanted them to introduce themselves to become more familiar, but Hyungwoo walked on silently, treating her words like passing wind. Woman Hai, standing behind, could only snicker at the scene. Mun Young grew annoyed at being ignored. Moon Hai's Solian, standing behind, explained that her man wasn't well versed in martial etiquette. Just then, Elder Tang Hogwan cut in. He wasted no time and went straight to the point. What he wanted was Hyungwoo's martial manual. The group fell silent. In this world, asking for another's martial manual was tantamount to a taboo. Elder Hogwan quickly changed the subject to ease the atmosphere. He asked Suleon about her plans for the Henan escort agency. Soleon affirmed she intended to revive her father's escort bureau. Upon hearing this, the old man made a lucrative offer. The Tang clan would exclusively use their services when passing through Henan. She felt both elated and uneasy. Such a great opportunity surely came with a hefty price, and the elder's condition was simple: let members of the Tang clan escort them. In truth, so they could observe Hyungwoo's martial skills. While others hesitated over martial codes, Hyungwoo felt it was no big deal. He simply thought it fine. Hyungwoo nodded in agreement at once, even giving a small smile that left Soleon and those around her wide-eyed with amazement. In fact, what the Tang clan sought was the legendary technique Thousand Thunders, a move that rained 1,000 hidden weapons like thunderbolts. It was completely different from Hyungwoo's true Thousand Thunders, the power to command real lightning from the sky that the Tang clan did not yet know about. As dusk fell, Elder Hogwan ordered Moonyoung to observe him closely. He believed the key the family sought lay in this young man. To verify, he decided to challenge Hyungwoo to a duel right at the camp. Hyungwoo calmly accepted and declared confidently, "I will win." Elder Hogwan snorted, saying it was merely a friendly exchange. Hyungwoo replied in kind that he would not kill the elder, for he had learned to hold back from previous fights. People stepped back to make way for the two masters. The air instantly grew tense. Hogwan cultivated his chi. A greenish aura spread outward along with sharp hidden needles. He was ready to display the Tang clan elder's prowess. But immediately, a brilliant blue lightning flared from Hyungwoo's sword. Tang Moonyoung held her breath, striving not to miss a single movement. Boom! A deafening explosion rang out. The colossal bolt struck down, causing the ground to tremble violently. Elder Hogwan was hurled far away, knocked unconscious on the spot. Hyungwoo drew back his power and coolly said, "I held back as much as I could." Moonyoung ran to the elder's side, her face drained of blood. "Is that what you call holding back?" She was stunned by the overwhelming force. Seeing the old man lie motionless, the young lady felt utterly powerless. The fight had been so fast, she hadn't even had time to see what happened. In the darkness, Moonyoung made the boldest decision of her life. For the future of the Tang clan, she could no longer stand by. She went to where Hyungwoo stood alone under the moonlight. This action did not go unnoticed by the others. Both Woomanhai and Soleon were pretending to sleep while watching the situation. They were curious what the Tang heiress intended to do at this hour. Moonyoung swallowed her pride and begged Hyungwoo to teach her Thousand Thunder. Moonyoung swallowed her pride and begged Hyungwoo to teach her Thousand Thunder. Hyungwoo answered briefly, "Very well." His nonchalance left Moonyoung dumbfounded. She couldn't believe her ears. Woomanhai could no longer contain herself and jumped up to object. Who would casually teach a clan's secret technique like that? This guy really knows nothing about the rules of the Jangha. Seeing that, Soleon also tiptoed out to ask if she could learn too. Hyungwoo didn't hesitate. He declared he would teach anyone who wanted to learn. In the forest at night, he stood ready to bestow a power that could shake the martial world. He called it Thousand Thunder. Hyungwoo began teaching everyone the Thousand Thunder. He said he would teach anyone who wanted to learn. So not only the men who knew how to use inner energy, but even the porters took up sticks and practiced. It was quite a lively scene in the forest. Hyungwoo demonstrated a single motion, raising the sword high and then bringing it straight down. He told them, "Watch closely." The group looked puzzled. "That's all?" Hyungwoo paid them no mind and told them to try. So everyone started swinging their swords and sticks in a chaotic mess. Soleon tried a similar move, but the moment she finished, Hyungwoo immediately pronounced bluntly, "Wrong." Munhae and Moonyoung's faces were also full of confusion. They had done exactly the same, so where could it be wrong? The Usquar continued their journey, and each time they rested they pulled out their swords to practice. But the answer they kept getting was only, "Wrong." Do it again. The exercise consisted only of lowering the sword. No secrets or methods of circulating chi were taught. Many began to lose heart, including Moonyoung. Moonyoung was annoyed. She thought to herself that maybe Hyungwoo never intended to teach them properly from the start. She regretted lowering herself to beg for lessons, even blaming Hyungwoo. He should have refused outright rather than make them do these childish tasks. But unlike Moonyoung, those who had been with Hyungwoo long enough all knew that he had never deceived anyone. Soyeon was convinced that the entire secret of Thousand Thunder lay within that simple downward sword motion. She persisted in swinging her sword despite sweating profusely. Seeing this, Hyungwoo stepped closer and said he understood where her problem lay. He suddenly stood right behind her. He took her sword-holding hand to adjust it. Woomanhai, standing nearby, grew jealous and shouted for them to separate at once. At that moment, Soleon felt her fingertips become frighteningly sensitive. She began to faintly perceive a strange current of energy. The inner energy on the sword started to circulate, merging with the natural energy. When the sword descended, the friction produced small flashes of lightning that even surprised Tang Hogwan. Hyungwoo asked if she understood. Blushing, she admitted she still couldn't perform it herself without his help. Seeing Soleon appear to have a breakthrough, Woomanhai became eager and demanded Hyungwoo teach her as well. Hyungwoo nodded in agreement. Seeing this, the porters also asked to learn again, and even Moonyoung sheepishly asked for another chance. But Hyungwoo's attitude changed immediately. He coldly declared, "Once you've given up, it's over. There are no second chances." Moonyoung fell silent. Luckily, Tang Hogwan intervened in time and told her to let him handle it. It seemed the old man had also just sensed something extremely special. Tang Hogwan repeatedly performed the move. The more he did it, the more excited he became. Having found a clue to decode his family's heavenly thunder secret, he wanted to combine the current he had sensed with the technique flower petals filling the sky. Hogwan turned to propose another match with Hyungwoo. Hyungwoo smiled and agreed. In truth, having spent a life swinging a sword merely to survive, these teaching sessions and conversations were quite enjoyable to him. They moved to a wider clearing. Hogwan said he would attack first, while Hyungwoo only needed to defend. Hyungwoo slowly drew his sword. For him, it was no longer a tense life-or-death battle, but a gentle daily routine. The match began. Hogwan raised his hand into the air, preparing to unleash his strongest technique. Hundreds of chi-infused needles lit up the sky. This was the Tang clan's famed flower petals filling the sky technique. Inner energy flowed into each needle, sending them hurtling forward at wind-tearing speed. The onlookers held their breath at the overwhelming force. No one dared think of dodging. To an ordinary person, facing this rain of needles would mean certain death. But Hyungwoo stood there, unnaturally calm. He swung his sword in a circle, sweeping away the entire volley of concealed weapons as easily as brushing off fallen autumn leaves. Hogwan couldn't believe his eyes. But Hyungwoo criticized, "Why are you launching needles so oddly?" To him, that strike was still too weak. Hyungwoo said it would be much more effective if thrown this way. He began to cultivate. A surge of bluish inner energy flared fiercely. Hyungwoo shouted, "Thousand Thunder!" Instantly, colossal pillars of lightning struck the ground, creating a suffocating pressure that enveloped the whole forest. Hogwan could only stand frozen, watching. This was the true Thousand Thunder Tang Hogwan had longed for, an overwhelmingly dominant power far beyond ordinary martial definitions. Just moments ago he was imposing. Now old Hogwan is frantically pleading with Hyungwoo to teach him the secret technique. The young lady's entourage standing at a distance could only gape in astonishment. Right now, there can be only one question in their minds. What kind of deity is this person to be so powerful? 3 days of relentless training and travel in all weather, and the journey home was finally drawing to a close. Standing on the hilltop looking down, Miss Jo Suleon breathed a sigh of relief at being home. But the sight before her made that joy vanish instantly. The Ahinan escort agency was now nothing but a ruined wreck. No roof remained intact. Everything would have to be rebuilt from scratch. Hyun Pyo asked if the young lady wanted to stop by the Jo mansion, but she only bowed her head and declined. The pain of seeing her home destroyed was still too great. Images of the blood demon raising everything returned like a nightmare. All the beloved family memories had been wiped out in a single short night. Though grieving, Hyung Pyo knew they had to make a decisive decision about the old property to secure funds to rebuild the agency. At the point of helplessness, Tang Hogwan unexpectedly offered to buy the land to open a branch for the Tang clan. He said he'd let his grandson manage it and that the young lady could visit whenever she wished. This generous offer moved the whole group deeply. He'd calculated it all. He wouldn't lose out on this deal. Even Miss Ruman insisted on staying and promised to cover all construction materials in exchange for the chance to be near Hyungwoo. She flashed a radiant smile, flaunting her family's wealth and influence. But Hyungwoo remained unfazed, simply stating that she could stay here until the house was rebuilt. Hyung Pyo urged everyone to start cleaning up. They'd just arrived to find a mountain of work waiting. The other escorts also agreed to stay and help. They laughed that aside from this agency, there was nowhere else to go. Buoyed by everyone's support, Ms. Jo was deeply moved. Thus the reconstruction of the Hunan escort agency officially began. Amid the busy construction site, Hyungwoo casually lifted a massive timber with one hand, leaving everyone stunned in amazement. Elsewhere, the red-haired man smiled maliciously as he stepped into a stranger's mansion. He strolled through corpses and walls of flame, offering a final greeting to the Hua family patriarch while his subordinates continued their frenzied slaughter. The entire Hua estate was engulfed in red flames. A brutal massacre was underway to eradicate the flame artillery techniques. This was the Lord's order. Destroy them completely so that no one would possess thunderclap bombs anymore. The Hua patriarch could only watch in despair as his legacy was reduced to ruins. The old master, furious, mustered his remaining strength to attack, but it was nothing against these villains. With the mission complete, the assassins withdrew quietly, leaving behind ashes and cold bodies. Thus another illustrious family was erased from martial history after a single bloody night. At the Murim Alliance, leader Dako Moon was troubled by reports of the successive disappearances of major families. The elders in the hall began to panic, fearing the enemy had obtained thunderclap bombs for malicious ends. Dako Moon brooded. He knew well that if flame artillery fell into wicked hands, the entire martial world would face a catastrophe of earth-shattering proportions. In a dark space, a pair of blazing red eyes let out a fiendish laugh at the chaos it had wrought. The leader, seated on the throne, praised his subordinate with satisfaction for having neatly dealt with the Hua estate. He began asking about the porter from the Hainan escort agency, the one who had foiled their earlier plan. Although he knew the opponent was a formidable monster, the leader confidently sent the Demon Shadow team to hunt him, believing they could finish him off. Back at the Hainan escort agency, reconstruction work continued at a frantic pace. While busy, Hyung Pyo burst in calling for the young lady, his face urgent as if something major had just happened. A new escort request had just arrived. The target was to protect the daughter of a high-ranking figure. But the most shocking part was that the legendary Sword King would be joining the protection of this journey. The name left Miss Jo stunned, unable to believe her ears. And so Dan Hyungwoo's second escort journey officially began, promising to be far more dramatic. The caravan leader was reviewing an escort request from Jum Ja-hung, a well-known tycoon from Henan. This mission was to take Miss Ju Myehua to Suzhou in Jiangsu province. Su Lian asked Yang Pyo whether he had thoroughly investigated the reasons behind the request. He nodded, confirming everything was clear. It turned out the Golden Alliance was under tremendous pressure from the Sato Alliance. Their target was definitely that enormous fortune, and Jia Heng intended to use his own daughter as bait. The plan was to draw the Sato Alliance's attention to the convoy while he struck directly at the enemy's stronghold. Upon hearing this, she immediately showed concern for the poor young lady's safety. But the Golden Alliance wasn't taking chances. They even hired Sword King, one of the 10 great masters, to protect the daughter. Still, he wondered whether they should let her get entangled with the Sato Alliance. She didn't answer immediately but turned to look at Dan Hangwo to see what he thought. Hyangwoo kept his usual indifferent expression, seemingly unconcerned about the danger of the upcoming mission. And then the journey officially began. The carriages started rolling into the deserted forest. Zhangqil was extremely excited, constantly urging his horse on. It was his first time taking part in the major mission as a genuine escort master. But when he glanced at Hyangwoo, Zhangqil saw his friend's sullen face and couldn't help feeling uneasy. Zhangqil wondered if Hyangwoo was jealous because he had advanced first, but he quickly dismissed the thought, knowing Hyangwoo never thought that deeply. He only hoped Hyangwoo wouldn't offend anyone on this trip. Inside the carriage, Sword King Yom Chulgan sat with his arms crossed, exuding an imposing pressure that commanded respect. Ju Myehua sat opposite, looking at the famed master and wondering to herself. She had heard he had been renowned for 60 years, which would make him over 80, yet he looked like a man in his 40s. Sword King noticed the girl's worry and spoke to reassure her, asserting he would protect her at all costs. Yawa thanked him demurely, but she still trembled inside. Up front, Hyangwoo had been silent, but his patience seemed to have reached its limit. He muttered, "This isn't right." Suddenly, Hyangwoo crouched and leaped high into the air. Zhangqil panicked and shouted when he saw his friend land straight onto the roof of the moving carriage. Standing on the roof, Hyangwoo felt much more comfortable. The reason was nothing dramatic. Sitting inside the carriage was simply too cramped and stifling for him. The young man's odd behavior made Sword King smile with amusement, thinking him quite an interesting character. But at that moment, the Sato Alliance's assassins suddenly appeared and surrounded the carriage. Zhangqil frantically warned Hyangwoo about the enemies behind them. Meanwhile, Hyangwoo had silently drawn his sword. Inside the carriage, Sword King told the young lady to stay seated. He would clear these men out quickly. His eyes grew cold, beginning to emit a killing intent. A blue surge of sword energy erupted from behind the carriage, startling the assassins into terror. "What is that? Who is he?" Sword King stepped out to meet them, clicking his tongue in disdain at the assassin's noisy approach. The masked men shouted to each other to focus on killing him first. Sword King moved with terrifying speed, sweeping the assassins away in the blink of an eye. He heathed his blade and stood nonchalantly among the piles of corpses. The entire ambush had been wiped out cleanly. Sword King smugly thought that this should have been the escort bureau's job, but he had stepped in to help. He was certain that anyone who studied martial arts could not take their eyes off that technique. He glanced up at the carriage roof, waiting for a reaction, but he froze when he saw the roof was empty. Hyangwoo hadn't even bothered to look or pay attention to the display of supreme skill, which slightly offended Sword King. Hyangwoo sat with his arms crossed as if nothing had happened. Zhangqil trembled and asked about the assassins behind them. Hyangwoo coldly replied that it was already taken care of. "But it wasn't me who did it, it was him." The carriages kept charging down the road, leaving behind the scene littered with the assassins' corpses. At the same time, at the Sato Alliance, the atmosphere was extremely tense. Leader Gal Chonak slammed the table in anger. He couldn't believe an elite squad of assassins had been wiped out just to capture one girl. A subordinate knelt on the ground, trembling as he apologized in fear. Gal Chonak realized the Jun clan had hired a formidable hand. He vowed to show them that money couldn't buy everything, especially when facing the Sato Alliance. Meanwhile, the escort with Hyangwoo and Sword King Yong Shogun continued advancing deeper into the perilous territory. Dusk fell, and the group stopped to rest at a roadside inn. The server bustled out the 20th dish, and he bowed to the group's bottomless stomachs. Ju Myehua and the Sword King stared in bewilderment at the pile of empty plates. While Hyangwoo calmly admitted that he loved to eat, he slurped his noodles, bowls stacked so high that Zhangqil was terrified to look at them. Zhangqil reached to grab a piece to try, curious what made Hyangwoo eat so enthusiastically. But Hyangwoo snatched it back, saying food is for eating, not sniffing, which made Zhangqil furious. Yuwa was amazed at how fast Hyangwoo ate, since she hadn't even had a chance to pick up her chopsticks. The young lady began to observe more closely the man the Sword King paid special attention to, though outwardly there was nothing remarkable except his hearty appetite. Yehua offered wine, but Hyangwoo declined, while Zhangqil complained that Yangwoo had wiped out the food, leaving nothing for him. Seeing leftover wine, Hyangwoo suggested finishing it. The Sword King nodded with a knowing look. Zhangqil trembled, wondering if all martial masters ate like this, since he hadn't even had a sip of water. Outside, the server trembled as he accepted praise from the strangers after helping them take care of business. Che Horyong smugly believed the poison in the wine and food would soon cripple the Sword King's skills. He was certain that in a little while the Sword King's inner strength would dissipate, and that would be when the ambush began. Back in the room, Hyungwoo suddenly warned Jung Chil that he shouldn't have eaten that food, leaving him puzzled. After waiting for Jung Chil to fall into a deep sleep, Hyungwoo began to act. He casually cultivated pale blue sparks flickering around him as he expelled all the poison from his body. At the same time, the assassins of the Unorthodox Alliance began to move, nimbly traversing the rooftops. Jumyo remained in a deep sleep, completely unaware that danger was near. Kei Horyong slipped into the room, looking at Yuhua with a perverted gaze, intending to molest her before killing her. Suddenly, a chilling aura of killing intent froze him in place. Sweat began to pour. The Sword King had woken some time ago. His eyes blazed with righteous fury, and he punished the intruder in an instant. The terrified assassin couldn't understand why the old man hadn't been poisoned. The Sword King growled that they had ruined his fine wine. His sword strikes, imbued with brilliant blue energy, tore the night apart as he began slaughtering the rats. Seeing Yuhua still asleep, the Sword King exhaled in relief, then wondered whether the others could protect themselves. In Hyunwoo's room, the detoxification process had also completed. Early the next morning, Jung Chil woke from a good sleep and stretched with a refreshing yawn. He nearly froze when he opened his eyes and saw a pile of corpses in the room, while Hyungwoo remained indifferent as if nothing had happened. Kangwoo said he had slept well too, then coldly ordered Jung Chil to clear away the wreckage before they set out. The group continued their journey, and the Sword King looked at Hyungwoo with admiration for single-handedly dealing with the assassins last night. The carriage left the inn, heading toward the next destination. Yesterday's formation failed. Jin Chaehyuk, another member of the Unorthodox Alliance, hid behind a wall. He ordered his subordinates to report to the leader that he would take action personally because the opponent was the Sword King. He released a flock of messenger crows, his sinister gaze watching the carriage from afar. Hyungwoo sat atop the carriage, his expression pensive as he looked ahead. The convoy entered the small village, but the unusual silence made both Jung Chil and Yuhua uneasy. The streets were deserted. Doors slammed shut at the sight of strangers, and an eerie chill settled over everything. Hyungwoo realized everyone here was terrified of something dreadful. They stopped before the deserted lunar flower pavilion. Hyungwoo jumped down to inspect. Jung Chil ran in to look but found not a single person or innkeeper. The Sword King realized the Unorthodox Alliance intended to finish things here, and Yuhua beside him also felt an ominous premonition. Hyungwoo confirmed it was killing intent. A massive amount of it was distorting the village's atmosphere. Even non-martial people like Jum Yuhua and Jong Jil could sense the thick killing intent enveloping them. Below, hundreds of Unorthodox Alliance fighters with blazing red eyes had surrounded the village, chanting the Sword King's name in unison. Jin Chaehyuk revealed himself with a malicious smile, mocking that a master like the Sword King would escort for money. He confidently declared that no matter how strong the old man was, he could not escape the encirclement of his 300 elite men. Despite the enemy's numbers, the Sword King told everyone not to worry. He decisively drew his sword. Brilliant blue chi radiated powerfully as he prepared for a deathmatch. While Jung Chil trembled in fear, Hyungwoo maintained a solemn, mysterious expression. The Sword King boldly declared he would protect them all. His aura exploded, overwhelming the pressure from the hundreds of enemies before him. Janyak screamed, ordering his soldiers to kill the Sword King to end the battle. The ranks of masked assassins surged forward like a tide. The Sword King swung his blade, blue slashes of sword chi tearing through the enemy formation. The old man sneered that the Unorthodox Alliance must be out of people to commit an entire legion just to capture a young woman. Jin Chaehyuk laughed triumphantly, confirming he had brought 90% of his forces here. Jung Chil and Yuhua went pale at the overwhelming enemy numbers, while the Sword King told them both to find a way to survive on their own. Dan Hyungwoo looked at the Sword King and muttered tersely, "Don't die." The Sword King laughed at the young man's admonition, then cultivated, letting the enemy see the true power of a king. The old man gritted his teeth as a chilling, deep blue murderous aura radiated from him. A cataclysmic burst of sword chi erupted, flattening the surrounding structures. The Sword King unleashed his most brutal strikes, sending the common soldiers flying like autumn leaves. He intended to use overwhelming force to crush the enemy sphere, but the sheer number of troops made them continue to charge wildly. After hours of non-stop fighting, the Sword King's body began to exhaust. His internal energy overloaded, putting him at risk of falling into demonic disorder. But the enemy gave him no time to breathe. Jin Chaehyuk seized the opportunity, swinging a vicious blow that knocked the old master to the ground. The Sword King collapsed. His body no longer obeyed his will. The leader leaped into the air to deliver the finishing blow, shouting that it was all over. The Sword King accepted his fate, lamenting that he hadn't had one last chance to see his granddaughter. Suddenly, a colossal bolt of lightning struck straight down at Jin Chaehyuk's position. Before the enemy hit the ground, Thousand Thunder incinerated them to ashes. To everyone's shock, Dan Hyungwoo emerged from the electric smoke with an expressionless face. Jung Chil gloatingly boasted that Hyungwoo's thunder was unrivaled. Hyungwoo stepped forward and placed his hand on the Sword King's head. The old man hurriedly warned him that he might contract demonic disorder. The Sword King was astonished to feel the blood chi in his body stabilize after a single touch. Startled, he asked who Hyung-woo was. The boy replied briefly that he was a porter for the Henan escort agency. The Sword King was at a loss for words at his benefactor's identity. The enemies began to regain their composure. Believing that despite losing a commander their numbers still dominated, they ordered a full assault once more. Hyung-woo looked at the charging crowd with hollow eyes and called down a merciless storm of lightning. The next morning, the Namgung clan's army entered the county following the report. Namgung Han froze at the hellish scene of devastation. Hundreds of unorthodox alliance corpses lay strewn across the streets. At that moment, a subordinate ran in to report that they had found the Sword King's location. Namgung Han ordered his men to clear away the rubble immediately. Inside, the Sword King was seated in meditation, the pale blue flow of his chi around his body gradually stabilizing. He opened his eyes and noticed unfamiliar faces that had just appeared. Namgung Han bowed respectfully and even brought a physician to tend to the elder's health. The Sword King immediately recognized him as the grandson of his friend Namgung Hak. He asked about his old friend's condition in a warm, familiar way. Namgung Han praised him lavishly, claiming it was the Sword King who single-handedly wiped out the unorthodox faction's army last night. But the Sword King only smiled enigmatically, then glanced toward Hyung-woo standing behind him. He affirmed that it was the ragged young man who had cleaned everything up. Namgung Han stood stunned, unable to believe his ears. He pressed further to confirm whether Hyung-woo was really just a lowly porter. Hyung-woo remained indifferent and added a remark about thunderous power, which angered Namgung Han, who felt the youth had been disrespectful to the elder. The Sword King waved his hand to stop him, saying there was no need to make a scene. He looked at Hyung-woo with calculating eyes. Suddenly, the old man asked if Hyung-woo would like to meet his granddaughter. It was an invitation to a matchmaking meeting as blatant as could be. Everyone froze at his brazen playfulness. Hyung-woo didn't hesitate and refused flatly, his face showing no emotion. Namgung Han mounted his horse and left after confirming everything was settled, not forgetting to bid farewell. The Sword King sent his regards to the youth's grandfather. Matters in the county had finally calmed down. Yua quietly observed everything through the conical hat's curtain. The Sword King reassured them that the remnants of the unorthodox faction were no longer a concern after last night's sweep. Everything had gone according to the Henan escort agency's plan. The Sword King and his granddaughter had in fact been bait for this larger operation. While the Sword King held the enemy in place, the Golden Alliance's forces launched an all-out assault on the Unorthodox Alliance's headquarters, forcing their leader to flee, wounded all over. The journey continued, but this time the Sword King brazenly climbed up and rode in the same carriage as the escort. Zhang Chil could only gape in amazement at the old man's casualness. Hyung-woo remarked that since recovering, the old man had begun to talk much more than before. He chuckled and teased the young man beside him. Offended at being called a child, Zhang Chil angrily urged the horse onward to escape the awkward atmosphere. Despite being refused, the Sword King did not give up and continued to boast that his granddaughter was very cute to coax Hyung-woo. The Henan escort agency's convoy carried on accordingly, and with a grandmaster like the Sword King accompanying them, everything seemed much easier. On the road, the Sword King told Zhang Chil that he felt a little sorry for him regarding the sword technique he had been taught. Seeing Zhang Chil enthusiastically practice Thousand Thunder brought back memories of the early days of the journey. He had trained tirelessly every single day. At that time, the Sword King happened upon Zhang Chil practicing and noticed that his swordplay contained too many unnecessary, redundant movements. Unable to stand by, the old man stepped in and taught Zhang Chil a few moves to refine his sword path. Thanks to the Sword King's instruction, Zhang Chil improved dramatically and survived deadly situations. But Hyung-woo didn't let him rest for a moment. On closer observation, the Sword King was stunned to realize that what he had dismissed as extraneous was actually a path to a more terrifying power. Hyung-woo's swordsmanship wasn't meant to look beautiful. It was meant to neutralize targets as efficiently as possible. Back in the present, the old man silently thanked the brat Hyung-woo for enlightening him to a completely new sword truth at his advanced age. The Sword King bluntly told Zhang Chil that it was now too late for him to practice flashy techniques, leaving Zhang Chil deeply disheartened. He explained that because Zhang Chil had become accustomed to an extremely effective sword path, his subconscious would automatically discard any showy decorative movements. His sword could now only kill. It could no longer be used to create beauty. Just as Zhang Chil was lamenting the loss of his coolness, a wind-tearing sound rang out, ominous and threatening. A dense, deep purple aura suddenly appeared. Zhang Chil startled and turned, sensing an overwhelming pressure crushing the surrounding air. Hyun-woo had also detected the presence of the stranger. From within the purple smoke, a figure gradually emerged with a mad grin and murderous eyes. He exuded a blazing demonic aura, unlike any enemy they had faced before. The assassin stood arrogantly, laughing triumphantly at his luck in encountering both the target and the famed Sword King. He radiated a pitch-purple killing intent that blanketed the area. The Sword King and Zhang Chil looked up with extreme vigilance. He realized this person did not belong to any ordinary force they knew. Hyung-woo remained standing there, quietly observing from above. He called out, asking plainly who Dan Hyungwoo was, declaring he would kill him first and only then play with the Sword King. His smile grew ever more twisted. It turned out the Demon Shadow army sent by the Blood Demon faction had finally traced Dan Hyungwoo's whereabouts. Night fell in the Blood Lord's secret chamber, where he was asking his subordinate about the progress of Demon Shadow's mission. He reported that T. Hyungwoo was traveling with the Sword King, which made the Blood Lord scoff at that old man's habitual ways. The subordinate Hyung Pyong reassured him that Demon Shadow had just attained the 9th level of the Blood Demon sword technique, truly a once-in-a-century genius. Cut to the forest edge, where Ma Yen Yonghyun arrogantly demanded to know who Dan Hyungwoo was so he could take his life. Dan Hyungwoo kept his composed expression, watching the assassins ready their weapons. Ignored, Ma Yonghyun flew into a rage, emitting a dark purple killing intent and demanding an immediate answer. The Sword King realized this man wasn't just targeting people but also intended to strike the young lady's carriage. A powerful slash came hurtling forward. Ju Muhwa screamed in fear as the carriage shook violently. Ma Yongyang grinned smugly, believing he had easily dispelled the Sword King's blade wind. But the Sword King calmly said he hadn't done anything, causing the assassin to start feeling unsettled. Dan Hyungwoo stepped forward silently, a blinding blue-white aura crackling around him like lightning. The assassin, still unafraid, mocked him for showing no sign of internal power. The Sword King watched the scene, thinking to himself that the man had provoked someone far more terrifying than himself. Ma Yongyan began to feel overwhelming pressure, furiously pouring strength into his sword as crimson demonic energy swirled. He unleashed the move Blood Fire, a blazing orb of energy hot enough to melt iron and steel. The assassins behind were astonished that their captain resorted to this ultimate technique against a mere porter. The heat made even the Sword King sweat, wondering if he could withstand the blow. Yet Dan Hyungwoo charged straight into the heart of the flame, effortlessly dispelling every attack. His speed was so great that Ma Yongyan couldn't keep up at all. He desperately swung his sword in vain, realizing the opponent before him was not as simple as he appeared. Every attack was nullified, and the assassin was stunned, wondering why this was happening. In an instant, Dan Hyungwoo closed in and broke his sword with his bare hands like snapping a dry twig. The assassins, knowing that interfering meant death, only dared to stand back in fear. With cold eyes, Hyunwoo made the assassin tremble as he realized the gulf in their levels could not be bridged. Seeing defeat was inevitable, Ma Yanghan immediately ordered the team to retreat to save their lives. He didn't forget to leave a threat that he would return soon to settle accounts with Dan Hyungwoo. Then he quickly vanished. Miss Gyu Muhwa looked out from the carriage, filled with admiration for the strength of her protector. After a tumultuous journey, the convoy finally returned safely to Henan. Soleon smiled and greeted everyone. Hyun Pyo introduced to her the arrival of a new young lady. She was left speechless upon hearing Hyungwoo's reputation had drawn so many people seeking to meet him. Hyun Pyo also mentioned that the unorthodox alliance had been wiped out, which made her involuntarily fall silent, recalling Hyungwoo's image. At that moment on Lake Hongsae, Dan Hyungwoo stood on a large boat, gazing into the distance as he signaled the start of a new journey, a peaceful corner of the lake under the sunset, looking as beautiful as a painting. This was the first time Hyungwoo had ever ridden a boat, having spent his life only fighting monsters. The vast river and lake scene was truly a new experience for him. Looking at the water, he recalled the dark days in the caves when he was so thirsty he drank monster blood. Ju Muo saw him standing dazed and moved closer to ask, worried he didn't want to talk to her. He answered tersely that it wasn't that, he was just admiring the view. She began to make small talk, explaining that although the lake looked as big as the sea, it was actually freshwater. Seeing her fidget, Zhongqil nearby hinted that to get this guy to open up, they needed to pull out food. Yua caught on immediately and told them about the superb Yawangbao dumplings nearby. At the mention of delicious food, his eyes lit up, and he bombarded them with questions about the address and when they would go eat. Yua was speechless at his appetite. Behind them, the Sword King was still busy adjusting Zhongqil's training posture. While they were enjoying themselves, Zhongqil suddenly pointed into the distance, wondering why so many unfamiliar boats had appeared on the lake. The large ships drew closer, the Yama emblem on their sails clearly visible. This was clearly the territory of the notorious pirates. Yua remained fairly calm, thinking that with the Sword King here the pirates wouldn't dare cause trouble. But she was mistaken. The Yama fleet had formed a tight formation surrounding their ship. Watching from afar, a subordinate reported to Demon Shadow that they had delivered the cargo to Yama's outpost. They used the pirates to eliminate the target so they wouldn't have to reveal themselves. Demon Shadow smiled wickedly. He planned to use the pirates as bait and take the chance to kill Dan Hyungwoo himself. Yan Joksum, leader of Yama, held a bomb engraved with the character Thunder, wearing an extremely smug expression. He was convinced this would send even the Sword King to his grave. He began to activate the bomb and bright streaks of electricity sparked out. A brilliant beam shot forth, heading straight for their target ship. Zhongqil was stunned, not understanding what was flying toward them. Yon Jaekham laughed exuberantly, declaring that everyone on that ship should prepare to meet their ancestors. But Dan Hyungwoo sensed the danger. His gaze turned cold and he focused intensely on the strange object. At the moment the bomb was about to hit the ship, Hyungwoo leaped and stopped it mid-air. A deafening explosion tore apart, flames and smoke covering the sky. Yuan and the others screamed in horror as they saw Hyungwoo engulfed completely by the blaze. Yeon Jae-kim went mad with rage, roaring and demanding who dared interfere. The Sword King stared up at the fiery void in shock. Hyungwoo had vanished entirely after that terrible blast. Demon Shadow in the distance laughed triumphantly. He believed that with the power of the true heavenly, even gods would be torn to pieces. Meanwhile in Hainan, Jo Soleon was engrossed in bookkeeping when she was startled by someone urgently knocking at the door. Hyun Pyo ran in to report that an important guest from the Marine Alliance had arrived. As soon as she heard the name of the alliance, Soleon felt that something was wrong. She suddenly felt extremely worried for Hyungwoo's safety. 2 guests arrived, Namgoon Jin, elegant and refined, and Pan Kalyang, with a fierce appearance. Namgoon Jin offered a phony greeting, pretending to be very concerned about Soleon's safety. He began to put on a show, claiming he had come to repay the debt of gratitude for saving her father's life years ago. He even declared that the Marine Alliance would protect the Hainan escort agency's reputation and finances. He praised Hyungwoo's deeds and the assistance of other clans as if he fully understood the situation. But Soleon was not easily fooled. She thought to herself that when her family was in trouble those people had vanished. Why were they suddenly so kind now? Though suspicious, for the greater good she maintained proper manners, thanked them, and invited them to rest. Bang Shil-young bowed very respectfully, but his sinister smile revealed that the plot to seize the escort agency had already begun. Turned back to this side, the blast was so powerful that even the Sword King was stunned. He thought Hyungwoo had been obliterated in the white smoke. Seeing the Sword King still unharmed, Yeon Jae-kim angrily drew 2 more thunder bombs to finish him off. He also sent a covert diving squad carrying thunder bombs to approach the ship from underwater without anyone noticing. He spoke words of farewell. The Jongcheol on the ship began to panic when they saw the enemy still wouldn't give up. The Sword King suddenly smiled confidently, telling everyone to stay calm because the lightning had turned back. A colossal pillar of light struck the lake, producing an earth-shattering explosion in the midst of the enemy fleet. The thunder bomb split in 2 and detonated, drowning the Yama pirate fleet in a sea of fire. Terrible screams echoed across the lake. Jumiwowa asked in surprise why only their ship was unscathed. The Sword King smiled inwardly, knowing it was thanks to his future son-in-law stepping in. Hyungwoo returned and urged everyone to leave quickly because he still sensed killing intent lingering under the water. Jeonchil anxiously looked down at the lake, where the enemy diving squad had been rendered completely unconscious by the aftershock of the second explosion. The third thunder bomb was about to explode deep under the water, but this time it became an immense thrust that propelled the boat forward even faster. The boat seemed to fly across the lake. Jeonchil shouted excitedly as the group escaped the danger zone at a terrifying speed. Hyungwoo's group faded toward the horizon, leaving the wreckage to the enemy. The demon shadow snarled with hatred, deciding to tail them secretly to find out who Dan Hyungwoo really was. The next morning, the group finally returned to the Golden Alliance headquarters. A magnificent palace appeared. Young Master Yu Baek-song himself stood at the gate to welcome them. Ju Myoa ran happily to Baek-song. The two seemed to have a very close relationship. Baek-song thanked everyone for bringing his sister back safely, and invited the whole group to a lavish feast that had been prepared. Seeing the table piled with delicacies, Hyungwoo thought to himself that working as a porter had been the right choice. While Baek-song and the Sword King discussed money and injuries, Hyungwoo focused solely on enjoying the food. Baek-song observed and remarked that Hyungwoo was an exceptionally unusual person with formidable ability. He began to mention a rumor buzzing about the newly discovered Cheonji's secret cave. The Sword King grew curious and asked what treasures the secret cave actually held. The secret cave, located on Tianzhong Mountain in Henan, was said to be filled with martial manuals and extremely rare mystical weapons. The Sword King wondered what Golden Alliance's next move would be in response to this shocking event. Baek-song revealed that the Marine Alliance had secretly dispatched troops to seize the Henan escort agency as a base to search for the secret cave. The Sword King suddenly realized that everything from the assassins to the pirates' firepower was closely connected. Hearing that his home was in danger, Hyungwoo immediately put down his chopsticks and declared he would return at once. Despite the Sword King and Baek-song advising him to rest, Hyungwoo did not change his decision. He vanished instantly in a flash of white, left everyone in the banquet hall utterly astonished. Dan Hyungwoo raced through mountains and forests at a speed far beyond that of ordinary people, his heart set solely on the Hainan escort agency. At the escort agency, smoke and flames were engulfing the main gate. Ms. Jo Si-leon appeared with a resolute look, ready to make a last stand to defend the place. At the same time, rumors about Xi'an Gija's treasures sent martial artists swarming to Tianzhong Mountain like ants, led primarily by the forces of the Marine Alliance. Standing atop the mountain looking down at the chaotic crowd, Dako Woon couldn't hide his fatigue as the situation gradually slipped out of control. Hwan, who reported that although half of the Rising Dragon Corps were stationed at the escort bureau, They were unable to offer any assistance to the Bureau's operations at this time. Dako Woon regretted secretly sending men to search for the cave, which had sparked a riot he had never foreseen. He told Wonhu to compensate the Henan escort agency generously later for these needless losses. He felt something sinister and suspected that the heavenly demon might be pulling the strings behind it all. Although his subordinates promised to be more cautious, Doko Woon couldn't help but worry about the safety of the escort bureau. At the Henan escort agency, the situation had become dire as the frenzied crowd screamed to break down the gates. Flames roared, consuming newly built rows of houses and turning the place into a sea of fire amid the siege of thousands of martial artists. Zhou Siulian and her subordinates watched in bitterness as their livelihood was destroyed by slanders accusing them of using poisonous arts on people. The nightmare began one dark night when members of the Rising Dragon Corps were secretly searching the mountain for the cave. Suddenly, a group of strangers appeared and attacked them without warning. The leader of the Red Wind Society's unorthodox sect, wearing a malicious smile, sneered and asked what the Marine Alliance was searching for. Ignoring the warnings, he realized the treasure rumor was true when he saw a scroll of secret correspondence at the opponent's waist. Not leaving anyone alive, the assassin ordered a slaughter to eliminate witnesses and prevent any information from leaking out. Other members were mercilessly massacred, and from then on, fabricated traces began to point back to Henan. A series of masters from various schools were suddenly poisoned, igniting fierce outrage. A vial of poison labeled Henan Escort Agency was found at the scene as damning evidence. All explanations now meant nothing. The enraged crowd demanded the Bureau hand over the antidote or they would level the place. Back in the present, Pain Kaliang came to apologize to Zhou Solian for failing to prevent the tragedy. She told him to speak plainly of his intentions, since she knew there was no room for pleasantries anymore. He delivered the thunderous news: the entire Rising Dragon Corps must withdraw immediately by order of the Alliance leader. He even shamelessly suggested she abandon her subordinates and go with him, but she instantly rejected that cowardly proposal. She declared she would never abandon her people and demanded that he leave immediately. Watching the only protecting force ride away, the others despaired, knowing they would be the crowd's next targets. Outside, arrows continued to rain down like a storm, threatening to shatter the last defensive barrier. But Joselion hatched a desperate plan: to use the Rising Dragon Corps' reputation to clear a path for escape. Pang Kolyang led the horsemen out, shouting for the crowd to get aside if they did not want to clash with the Marine Alliance. He leveraged the organization's prestige to force the enraged martial artists apart to either side. Seeing the fragile opening, Zhou Solian knew the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity had arrived. She shouted commands and, risking everything, led all the Bureau members in a desperate charge out of the ring of fire. Henan Escort Agency's procession shot off like an arrow. The enemies stared in astonishment, not expecting them to use the Rising Dragon Corps as a human shield to escape. The crowd snapped back to their senses after a moment and shouted as they mounted horses to give chase. The pursuit turned fierce, aimed directly at Solion's group. The whole group hammered their horses toward Tianzhong Mountain, where the Murim Alliance was stationed. Meanwhile, amid the ashes of the Henan Escort Agency, many fighters were still rummaging everywhere looking for traces of the antidote. A creak sounded through the rubble. Dan Hyungwoo had returned. He stood silent, staring at the place he had once been attached to, now mercilessly destroyed. Seeing the devastation, Hyungwoo recalled the spot where he used to sit and enjoy his meals. A nearby fighter noticed the escort agency uniform on him and sneered. He brandished a club and threatened Hyungwoo, demanding the antidote or threatening to chop off his hands. Hyungwoo coldly replied that they had just destroyed the place where he used to eat. Blue bolts of lightning began to coil around Hyungwoo. Boom! Heavenly thunder struck, sweeping away the looting fighters in an instant. Hyungwoo stood amid the ashes, his eyes cold as he asked where everyone had gone. The fighter trembled and confessed that everyone had fled toward Tianzhong Mountain. He swore he wasn't lying. Hyungwoo grabbed him by the collar and dragged him roughly, ordering him to lead the way immediately. He threatened that if anything happened to his people, the man would pay with his life. Back at Tianzhong Mountain, Solion's group was finally cornered at a perilous cliff. Their horses had all collapsed from exhaustion. "Hold on, everyone," Siulian shouted to rally them. She knew few of her people knew lightness skill. If captured, death was certain. The pursuers descended like starving tigers from above. Solian looked up to see an enemy blade hovering right over her head. In that life-or-death moment, Solian recalled the escort agency being burnt and vowed never to let anyone else sacrifice themselves. She refused to let them do as they pleased. Solian drew her sword, determination in her eyes as she faced the enemy. The enemy roared for the antidote and threatened to kill her on the spot if she didn't hand it over. Solian remembered the day's training with Hyungwoo, searching for a sliver of hope in this desperate situation. "I can do it." A decisive strike sent an enemy flying, blood spraying. Solian struggled to hold the formation and protect everyone. She shouted that the escort agency was completely blameless, but the fighters in front paid her no heed. The accompanying escorts also drew their swords, ready to fight to the death. The surrounding fighters ordered everyone to surrender. They didn't care about explanations. They only wanted to capture people alive to demand the antidote. In the stalemate, Solian decided to take a gamble. She focused all her spirit energy, trying to replicate Hyungwoo's thousand thunder technique she had once witnessed. Faint blue sparks began to appear along the blade. Sulian swung with the greatest force she could muster, tearing the air toward the enemy ranks. Suddenly, a hand gently touched her back. "Not a bad stance," said a voice. Sulian flinched, cold sweat trailing down her cheek. That voice could be none other. It was Dan Hyungwoo. He stood there with a faint smile, announcing he had completed his second escort and returned. A thunderous kick from Hyungwoo sent the charging enemy flying. He told Solian to step aside and that he'd handle the rest. The escorts gaped in astonishment as their savior appeared at the right moment. They couldn't understand how he had arrived here as swiftly as a phantom. Murderous intent began to billow from Hyungwoo, plunging the battlefield into a gloomy aura. Both enemies and allies trembled under the overwhelming pressure. Sulian hurriedly grabbed his arm, pleading urgently for him to stop for a moment. She recognized the danger in Hyungwoo's eyes now. She explained it was a clever trap and that she didn't want him to sink deeper into the senseless slaughter.